Hi, I'm Arthur, and it's time. I've been sitting on this video concept for quite some time now, and I can no longer hold it back. About a month, maybe 2 months ago, I said I was going to collect 40 different YouTube content creators in the Warhammer space to make a mega collab video, and I did. Sort of. It took a lot of work, pestering, and probably doing irreparable damage to my reputation as a content creator for all the threatening emails, but I did it. Sort of. So, at a certain point, I managed to have over 43 to 45 different creators on board, but due to life circumstances and different things kind of happening, a lot of people ended up dropping. But at the end of the day, we got as close as humanly possible to it. I think at the final count, we have somewhere between about 37 and 39, which is just shy of the 40, but I think I'll take my trophy saying that this is the largest Warhammer collab in history. So, what is the video that you're about to be watching? Well, it is a video of as many content creators as I could grab talking about one of their favorite characters in the entirety of the setting of Warhammer. It could be fantasy, it could be 40k, it could be the Horus Heresy, you name it, they could talk about it. Though it was mostly 40k, as you'll come to find out, I still think that it was an overwhelming success. So, without further ado, let's start. Remembrancer, let's kick this shit into high gear.
Greetings everyone, it's me, the Remember Man. Arthur asked me to pitch my favourite character in 40k for this rather ambitious and colossal collaboration, so for me there was only really one viable option: Jaghatai Khan. Now we all know about the Primarchs and there's a lot of cool characters to choose from. You got your Caesar Salad, Tywin Lannister, Edgar Allan Poe and Archangel Mikey, but none compare to the Khan of Khans, and here's why. Let's start with looks. Look at this man. Look at this man! Every one of the Primarchs has cool armor and their own unique style, and 40k in particular really excels at designs for the majority of its characters, which put aesthetics at the forefront, even if it doesn't realistically make sense. But Jaghatai, both in the lore depictions and his Forge World model, just ooze this wild sophistication. His armor is not too bulky, it's got some flair, and it's not too complex that its key elements get drowned out in too much finery. I'm looking at you, Fulgrim. Jaghatai obviously has a lot of overt Mongolian and Asian cultural trappings, and as the premier character that brings those influences into the universe, I think he looks absolutely brilliant. He's classy enough to not have too much signature weapons. I'm looking at you, Fulgrim. His armor has a nice selection of vibrant colors and patterns without being too cluttered, and no matter the distance or size of his appearance in any part of 40k media, he's instantly recognizable. Now that's all well and good, Memby, I hear you mutter as you squeeze your Administratum-issued Codex Astartes compliant plushie of Cato Sicarius, but what about the lore? The lore? The lore. Let's put this in perspective. Rabute Guilliman has practically battled every traitor Primarch in the setting with exception given to Horus, and every time he either got his face rearranged or got a hefty, and I mean a hefty, amount of help. The Lion's pretty cool, but he only battled Conrad Kurz and recently Angron, and though he won both times, didn't get to battle many of them. Sanguinius managed to beat Angron, but perished at the hands of Horus, and Rogel Dawn managed to stay alive fighting Fulgrim, and even managed to kill Alfarius. Allegedly. Jaghatai? He scrapped with Mortarion and that's about it, right? Wrong. Mr. Khan also managed to beat up Fulgrim on several occasions, not with blades, but with wisecracks, baby. To quote, I heard from a contact on Mars, Jaghatai, that you do strange things to your ships. The Khan shot him a heavy-lidded stare. I heard from a contact that you do strange things to your warriors. Plus of all the Primarchs to me, Jaghatai has the most consistent and moral outlook on life. He's a bit of a rebel, but he's not a traitor. He's a loyal son, but he's not a yes man that does everything he's told. When the Horus Heresy broke out and Leman Russ petitioned aid from Jaghatai to enter the fray, Jaghatai refused to be involved until he could ascertain the reason for the conflict, and independently ventured out to find out where he stood as the chaos continued to spread. Level-headed, master swordsman, a good son to the Emperor, and father to his legion, Jaghatai, for good reason for most people, is the GOAT of Warhammer 40k. I for one would love to see him return to face Fulgrim in a proper duel, and say something like, "Well, Fulgrim, you are much changed. Still, after 10,000 years, one might think to tell you that rather than wielding multiple swords, your time might be better spent mastering just the one." And to wrap things up before this becomes a several-hour gush fest of how cool the Khan is, I'd like to end my rant with another quote, which I think epitomizes why I like the Khan so much, taken from the book series of The Siege of Terror. "I anticipated slaughter long ago," said Dawn, "and I regret that his chain of events come to pass, but we cannot respond to whatever provocation he lured out. We cannot follow his plan. We will make ourselves weak, then all is lost. Since when was saving mankind from the darkness a sign of weakness?" said the Khan. "Sanguinius, my brother and comrade, what do you see? Lend me your foresight." Sanguinius shut his eyes. Like that, he appeared drawn and tired, a funerary moment to himself. Dawn suppressed a shudder. "My sight is not so clear as father's," said Sanguinius. "The future is ever in flux. Only some events." He paused, finding the words hard to say. "Only some events are certain." "Do you see me? What will be the consequences of inaction?" "I see fire and blood, and a world laid waste if you do not act." "If I act," said the Khan. Sanguinius opened his eyes to look at him. "There is grave risk to you, a confrontation unlooked for, and if you survive, a flight from one danger into greater peril." "Who will I face?" "I cannot divine." "Will I save lives?" Sanguinius nodded. "Many." "That is what I was made for," said the Khan. "I will ride out." Thanks for watching. Subscribe to Arthur Bones 40k and the Remembrancer and buy a motorcycle.
When asked who holds the title of Chapter Master of the stoic and tactically adept Ultramarines, you might be tempted to answer Robubodi Guileman, that guy, the living Primarch upon whose template the entire chapter is based and around whose teaching they've crafted their entire identity. But the big G-Man is busy with the day-to-day running of an entire Imperium and probably sourcing his infinite supply of Armor of Contempt. So they've entrusted their leadership to this absolute maniac, Marneus Augustus Calgar. His friends call him Mac. While the rest of the Ultramarines chapter might be the picture of taciturn nobility, Calgar is basically a deranged bad man draped in the royal blue and gold of the chapter. Equipped with an artificer suit of big boy Gravis armor dubbed the Armor of Heracles that was constructed from pieces of his ancient Terminator armor suit, Calgar goes to battle fitted with two wildly oversized power fists that had once been liberated from a Chaos Lord by Guilliman himself in the days of yore. Allegedly, the adamantine shell of these gauntlets is far too strong for anyone to actually disassemble and study them, meaning that Calgar is almost assuredly wielding chaos artifacts on a daily basis without even knowing. Not that he would mind particularly, probably. As a little tyke, Marneus Calgar was actually a cute little guy named Tacitin. That was until his friend Marneus Calgar was murdered by a Khornate cult. I know it's confusing, but please bear with me. So after this murder, Tacitin did a little identity thievery and renamed himself Marneus Calgar so that Marneus Calgar's memory could live on forever in Marneus Calgar as an immortal space marine. Some of that Khornate occultism must have rubbed off on Tacitin because over his long and storied history, Marneus Calgar has accrued more accolades and achievements than any other Ultramarine save Guilliman himself, most of which involve punching people into a fine paste with his big, powerful fists. Having laboriously crossed the Rubicon Primaris, probably in order to make himself bigger and stronger and better at punching people into dust, Calgar rides into battle in a custom tricked-out Land Raider called Maximus, probably to get closer to punching people to death using its assault ram. His unquenchable bloodlust also makes his whole crew significantly faster, so they can get to punching people more quickly. And the big man always chills with his posse of Victrix honor guards, elite ultramarine warriors that dutifully eat bullets for the chapter master so he doesn't die before he has punched every enemy on the battlefield to death, all in service of some of the most ludicrous melee output of any Space Marine character in Warhammer 40,000. This dude just loves punching, and that's the story of Marneus Calgar.
I know, Vulcan, he said, having recovered some of his composure. Your beacon won't work. This chamber is teleport shielded. Nothing goes in or out, except through that gate behind you.
Still trembling with the aftershocks of absorbing the energy shield, Kurs managed to stand.
Did you think that you had broken me, brother? Did you believe that you had tricked me into letting you escape?
He grinned.
Hope is cruel, isn't it? And yours was false, Vulcan.
You are right, Vulcan conceded, holding up Dawnbringer so he could see it. I fashioned it as a teleporter, a means to escape even a prison such as this. I counted on you leading me here, on you needing to face me one last time. It seems I was fooled into thinking you hadn't planned for this. He lowered the weapon and let the weight of its head pull down the haft until his hand was firmly wrapped around at the very end of the grip. But you are forgetting one thing. Kurs leaned in, as if eager to hear his words. He believes that he had him, that he would never escape this trap. However, Kurs was wrong.
What's that, brother?
It is also a hammer. Yes, indeedy, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about the biggest big dick Chad Thundercock motherfucker this side of the Imperium. There's also a loving huggy teddy bear. We are talking about Vulcan, baby, and Vulcan is bloody awesome because Vulcan lives! But before I get into gushing, gawking, and barking and talking about this wonderful, beautiful chunk of chocolate man meat here, I should probably tell you his story. So when Biggie created the Primarchs, Vulcan got yeeted and he landed on a place called Nocturne. Nocturne, pretty shit place, not gonna lie. Has dragons. Dragons wanna kill you though. Also, its crust was so flaky they would make a pie goddamn jealous, let me tell you what. He landed in the home of a blacksmiter named Nabel. Thus, Vulcan joins the Hallow ranks of the few Primarchs who actually had a proper family growing up. And in 3 years' time, he would grow to be well over the size of a normal human, becoming an excellent blacksmith and craftsman. In the 4th year, however, his plant was raided by Dark Eldar. At this point, everyone was running and hiding. Vulcan said fuck that, grabbed two-handed smithing hammers, dual-wielding them sons of bitches, and went to town, pounding that Eldar ass so good that even Gilliman would approve, slaying over 100 of the foul, filthy Elgi all on his own, driving them completely away from Nocturne forever out of sheer goddamn terror. Thus, the 7 major settlements of Nocturne all pledged allegiance to Vulcan, declaring them their leader. Where he could have been made king, that was Vulcan's style. He then became known as the Fireborn. A few years later, during the time of trials, when Nocturne's not so buttery but very flaky crust decided to crack open like a goddamn Sunday picnic, a chap by the name of the Pale Stranger appeared. Wonder who he could be.
It's Biggie.
And then challenged Vulcan to a series of duels, saying that the loser would swear allegiance. Vulcan took this up because he's Vulcan, and they were even in pretty much almost every single duel, where the final duel would be slaying of a salamander. So Vulcan found a big chunky salamander and he managed to kill it, but then the ground gave way because, well, earthquakes. At this point, Vulcan was left hanging on to the ground with one hand and a salamander onto another with a floor of lava right below him. He had a choice: let go of the salamander and climb up, or hold on to the salamander so he could win. He chose the latter. Biggie then rocked up. He then chucked his much bigger salamander into the lava lake and helped Vulcan up, allowing the two to escape. When they got back to town, Vulcan was decreed the winner because he actually had a salamander. However, Vulcan then got on one knee and declared allegiance to the Emperor, saying that any man who was willing to sacrifice his pride is a man worthy of his service. Lo and behold, Biggie did his reveal thing, yada yada blah blah. Vulcan gets tutored by Ferris, gets introduced to his legion, murders a whole bunch of Xenos, compliance, very good, remember Caldera, it will be very important later. However, eventually, he would be involved in something called the Drop Site Massacre, where him, the Iron Hands, and the Raven Guard had a site, they dropped in it, and they were massacred. Betrayed on all sides, Vulcan was the last bastion of the Defiance, holding out resolutely against all foes. So much so, that good old Peter Turbo Laservision looked at that and said, yeah, the sword can't kill you. How about a nuke though? But it turns out the nuke could in fact not kill Vulcan, because Vulcan is perpetual. He's basically bloody immortal. It was at this point that he was then kidnapped by Conrad Kurz.
Yikes.
If you know anything about Conrad Kurz, you are fucking yiking right now, my guy. He was then captured and tortured by Kurz for God knows how long, until eventually he would break free, and he would eventually land up in Macragge. It was at this point that when he entered Macragge, he kinda lost his shit, cause he fell through the atmosphere and got burnt to a crisp. Thus he went a little crazy and began murdering heretics all across up and down Macragge, until a very bullshit, not fun character, until a Horus Heresy character by the name of John Grammaticus showed up and then proceeded to stab him with a piece of Fulgurite, aka Psychic Glass. It was at this point that the remaining salamanders took his body over to Nocturne, where everyone believed that he was dead. Everyone except for his first captain, Artilus Numian. Numian then sacrificed himself by tossing himself into Mount Deathfire, and lo and behold, the Primarch was resurrected. Then him together and 3 of his boys managed to hop in a webway portal and landed up in the Siege of Terra. After the Heresy, however, he would then decide to dip, and he wanted to destroy all of his artifacts, because they were very good, but also very powerful. He was then convinced not to, and thus none of them was spared. He then dipped for about 1,000 years, then M32, the Beast arrived, and threatened the world of Caldera, which Vulcan had promised to defend. Vulcan then showed up, and then absolutely dumpstered an alpha level Prime Croc, and then got put on his respawn timer indefinitely. We don't know when he'll come back, or in what state, or whenever. But if the mysterious Tome of Fire is to believe, the Salamanders need to reunite all 9 artifacts of Vulcan, and he will arrive in the most dire of hour to lead the Drakes of humanity in salvation of the Imperium once again. So that was the TLDR. Yes, it is. 40k lore is like that. But why should you love Vulcan? Well, I don't know, because I ain't you. But I know why I love him. Barris Manus has been quoted saying that Vulcan is a destroyer. He is wrath and rage incarnate, and he is one of the best combat Primarchs up there. The thing is though, Vulcan is also a softie. Many oftentimes in points he questions himself and he doubts himself. He doesn't presume to know everything and always acts in a kind, soft manner. He is the definition of a gentle giant. But woe betide you if you provoke his anger, or his ire will be wrathful indeed. Yet in every aspect that we see Vulcan, we see both his fury and his kindness in equal measure. His fury is not lessened by his righteous kindness, nor is his righteous kindness doused by his massive fury. He is the perfect example of a balance of sorts, of being a character that knows what he is, that is not afraid of his strength, that is not afraid of his power, but at the same time recognizes that he has it for a reason and that he must use it wisely, if for no other reason than to honor the fact that he has it and to honor humanity that came before him. So that's why I love Vulcan, and I hope you love Vulcan too. Hey, you forgot to talk about the older child! Do you know the context to that story? No? I didn't think so. Oh.
Into the fires of battle! Onto the anvil of war!
Hi. I'm Jacob. Nah. This is WarhammerWiki. What's up, all you great crusaders? Today, Arthur Bones has actually allowed me to choose what I'm going to speak about today to you guys. And with that being said, I live in Seattle. I absolutely love the greenery here, so I wanted to talk about trees. I absolutely love trees. Trees are awesome. Trees killed my great-grandmother. Can't get up! Maybe I don't like trees, but this specific tree I actually do like, and this tree is Eldrad Uthrin. Some of you might be wondering what I mean by a tree. And I mean this in all seriousness, Eldrad is a tree. He is a Farseer, and in fact he is a very old Farseer, the oldest Farseer that we know about.
I'm old, Gandalf. I feel thin, like
a tree. Farseers are psychic Eldar that are able to control the warp with their mind, and Eldrad has become very good at this since he's been around for tens of thousands of years. Now when Farseers get all tuckered out, they decide to go into their craft world. In Eldrad's case, this is Ulthway's craft world. They settle down next to the Wraithbone inside of the craft world, and that's basically what the craft world is made out of. And craft worlds are just worlds that are crafted. They fly around space. Woo! Super cool. And just like every other Farseer before Eldrad, he just wanted to go to sleep and become one with the Wraithbone. As he was slowly converting to Wraithbone, I guess the cosmos said, nah, dog, you don't get to sleep. You gotta grind more. You gotta make that money. You gotta be top G. So he got booted out of the actual little sanctuary. Boom! And now he's a walking tree, kind of like an Ent from Lord of the Rings.
I
I mean, that kind of explains why he doesn't have a girlfriend. Speaking of Eldrad's lovers, Eldrad and the Emperor a long time ago might have been lovers. By lovers, I just mean really good friends, or maybe they chatted once or twice. Either way, they aren't on talking terms right now. Eldrad probably was trying to rebound hard and forget about the Emperor, so he ended up going to this play where the Harlequins, which are basically just jesters in the Eldar complex, were performing a play. And Eldrad's like, man, I've seen this play like a billion times. It's the birth of Slaanesh. It's the birth of the She Who Thirsts. It's the person that killed our everyone. And then this Dark Eldar came up, which are basically just evil Eldar. And said, yo, Eldrad, I've seen this play like way more times than you have, and guess what? It's not that play. This is a new play. This is a play taking place right now, and it's going to be the birth of a new god. Eldrad said, holy crap, you are right. I see it in a vision. I need to go talk with the humans again. And Eldrad ended up tracking down our favorite boy, Fulgrim. At this point, Fulgrim had already turned to, out of all of the Chaos Gods, he turned to Slaanesh. Eldrad's like, oh my gosh, they're already screwed. Mankind's already screwed. He said, F this, and just ended up leaving, right? He just skedaddled after, Fulgrim wrecked, an avatar of Cain, which always happens in the books, and also wrecked a Wraithlord, which had lived for a very long time. So Eldrad's a little bit pissed off. Eldrad really tries to get over this anger by killing these alien species called the Cabal. The Cabal have been around for thousands of years, and the Cabal, very similar to Eldrad and all of his wispy mysticism and logic and seeing ahead in the future, were able to see the outcome, or what they thought the outcome was going to be when Horus betrayed the Emperor, which is either the Imperium of Man wins, and then everything goes to crap and slowly gets corrupted by chaos until there's nothing left, and the Emperor, I think, survives in this case. And then when it comes to the other side, which is if chaos wins, which is what they wanted to have happen, the Emperor gets killed, Horus becomes a new god, Horus ends up killing all the other chaos gods because he's Horus and he's silly and he's swirly and he's the way that he is. And so he goes and, takes them all out, thus allowing all of the rest of the people within the Milky Way galaxy to have a good rumpin' time. Eldrad said, oh my gosh, screw this, I'm the only person that can see into the future. Me and my ex-Emperor bro. The tree he is, which trees are very silent unless they fall. He's sneaking around, right? And then he pops out, slowly kills off each Cabal one by one. I know Chrono the Harlequin is absolutely going to love this. Live from the Black Library, he implores John Grammaticus out of all of the people to help him with his plan to take out the Cabal. I'm running out of time, so I'm gonna wrap this up. Basically, Eldrad says, I'm gonna try one more Primarch, ends up talking with Vulcan, who is the bestest of boys when it comes to the Primarchs, and Vulcan is like, I actually really like you. I kinda hate Eldar and I burn them on a regular basis, but I like you because you're disguised as an old man, and as a token of friendship ends up giving him a tooth, and he's like, wow, thanks for this tooth. This is gonna come in handy later. And then when orcs are about to start invading Terra and all this crap, he sends 7 Harlequins in and they start killing Custodes, which doesn't make any sense. There's only one Harlequin left and it has the tooth and it presents it to the Emperor and says, I want to show you this tooth because it shows you that we're coming in, coming in hot.
We're coming in too hot.
No, coming in as a friendly, because it's almost like, killing Custodes is maybe, like a bad way of showing that you're friendly. Eldrad goes, he manipulates the warp, saves the humans from the orcs, and in this section, just so you know, more stuff happens with orcs. Eldrad creates Gazgul and Yorick situation and Jane Czar, and they get their butts kicked and whatever. I don't have time to explain, but more stuff happens with orcs. Now he is tempted to go to this very specific place in the galaxy, and he's like, I've been feeling this weird way whenever I get very close to this place. And then once he's close to the place, he's like, oh, I'm super close. What the frick is going on? Then he realizes that he's actually in the presence of Slaanesh, and Slaanesh goes and straight up just swallows him, and he dies. Yeah, that's all of Eldrad's lore. Psych!
Psych! That's the wrong number!
He's still a tabletop character, which means that he has plot armor, because they want to sell models! Yeah! By the way, I bought his model, so I'm the demographic that they were going for by retconning this part. That is all the time that I have for today. Thank you so much, Arthur, for allowing me to come on and help you out with this collab. Maybe I'll finish Eldrad's story on the next one that you do. Instead of having 40 collabers, maybe we'll have 40,000, and I will talk to you later. Bye.
Angron, the Red Angel, Lord of the Red Sand, heir of the 12th Legion. A monster in every sense of the word, Angron was a Primarch, a son of the Emperor of Mankind himself, consumed by a dark and ticking rage. He had no control of his emotions, no influence over his mind, and no limits to his angelic brutality. Angron was a broken man, a failed son to the very last moment. And while some may say he deserves what he got, his origins speak of a tale far sadder and depraved than what even the Emperor may have wished upon him. After the freak accident of the scattering of the Primarchs, the young 12th Primarch would find himself in the high icy mountains of New Syria. No sooner than he had crawled from his burning wreckage of a lifeboat, the militaristic denizens of New Syria started assailing the child Angron. He fought with tooth and nail, but as he was yet inexperienced in the arts of combat and heavily disorientated from his travels in the warp, he was an easy prey to be taken as a prisoner. The High Riders whipped Angron and his fellow slaves into massive gladiatorial rings, forcing them to slaughter each other until one blooded champion would remain. Although Angron would be beloved by the watching population, due to being instilled by a deep power of empathic fortitude that could even heal the minds of the dying, he was a rebellious creature at his heart. Through rebellion and the ignorance of orders, Angron would be implanted with the ticking butcher's nails, turning his empathic and hopeful mind into a raging, frothing, ticking time bomb. His personality and powers were washed away, and his godlike physics were pushed to their very limit in the name of endless slaughter. Eventually, Angron could rally his fellow gladiators to rise against their cruel masters. And then, the Emperor showed up. In the cold tops of the mountains, Angron would deny his genetic father and proclaim his wish for death in the glorious combat amongst his brothers and sisters. The Emperor, being the man that he was, ignored his son's wishes. And in the very last moment, the fighting Primarch would instantaneously be teleported into the belly of his new flagship. After months of seclusion and the slaughter of 7 Adeptus Astartes Warhound captains, Karn, captain of the 8th Company, convinced his grieving Gene-sire to join the Legion and lead them in the Great Crusade. Angron did not care for his father's dreams. He saw his new superhuman sons as disgusting failures, and he did not wish to add to another tyrannical empire. However, the promise of slaughter and the application of endless bloodshed ticked warmly in Angron's butcher's nails. Although he himself did not care, his sons had been renamed to the Eaters of Worlds as a reference to his gladiators Eaters of Cities title, and they had started to implant crude copies of the Butcher's Nails into their own ranks as a hopeful last ditch to get closer to their broken father. Angron deteriorated along with his legion, and as the Horus Heresy commenced, the Red Angel would bring blood to the sands of New Syria once again. While the Primarch himself didn't fully know this, his closest, if you can even call it that, brother, Lorgar of the Word Bearers, tricked him and his legion into the grasps of Khorne, Chaos God of Blood and Skulls. Lorgar offered his brother to Khorne's will, and Angron will be liberated from his slow death at the hands of the constantly ticking Archaeotech torture device. But as his sons saw the reborn Primarch emerge from the blood-splattered firestorm, they saw the incarnation of unending rage. The reborn Demon Prince of Khorne, Lord of the Murder Curse, and bringer of unending doom.
Few Night Lord characters have garnered as much love and attention as that of Talos Valkoran.
Even more so than my insane Primarch, Conrad Kurz.
So, we just wanted to shed a light on one of the greatest traitor space marines in the setting. Enjoy.
Talos Valkoran, known by his given name from his Primarch, Conrad Kurz, was dubbed the Soul Hunter. Talos was an apothecary of the Night Lord Legion's 10th Company as part of First Claw, as well as a prophet to the Legion due to his gift of foresight, one shared with that of his Primarch, often putting him in sieges that would incapacitate him for days or even months. Despite his line of work in Legion, he was one of the few Night Lords that had a strong sense of justice and an often blinding delusion, viewing the Legion with honor and glory throughout the Great Crusade.
Talos grew up in the streets of Nostromo with his childhood friend Zarl as gang kids who would later ascend to the Night Hunters Legion.
During the Great Crusade, 10th Company would return to Nostromo to parade through the streets on the orders of their captain Malkarian, who was overwhelmingly sentimental for a Night Lord. While the Marines marched, many of their mortal parents would break through the lines in desperation to find their long-lost children. One such mortal was an elderly woman who pleaded in desperation for Talos to acknowledge her. While he did just that, it was only just in time to see her get executed by the armed guards. Talos would show little to no emotion in response to his mother's death.
After the heresy would live up to his title's namesake, the Soul Hunter, by pursuing his father's assassin Mishen out of pure vengeance when others would pursue her out of greed, due to the relics she had stolen, rather than lamenting their father's murder. After a grueling chase, he finally cornered her. During their fight, he blinded, deafened, and impaled the assassin upon his chainsword,
commonly referred to as the Night Lord's special,
avenging his Primarch's death.
During the Scouring, the Ultramarines and a number of their successors would assault Sargosa, scattering the 8th Legion across the galaxy. 10th Company would escape this battle at an unknown time, would travel through the warp, landing them somewhere near the end of M41.
Though Talos was an apothecary, he would become First Claw's leader after Vandred the Exalted's ascension upon Malkarian's death, skillfully leading them through multiple engagements. Some of his more notable feats would include leading First Claw in destroying a Warhound Titan, laying siege to a Calidus temple, and fighting off several other chapters and warbands over a number of wars.
Later, the 10th Company would ally with the Black Legion in an assault of a Forge world. During this time, Talos would meet with Abaddon himself, who would attempt to sway the Night Lord over to the ruinous powers. During the assault, a rejected Abaddon would shoot Talos in the chest, weirdly causing Talos to undergo an out-of-body experience where he would be one by one met with each of the Chaos Gods, each of them trying to win his favor except Nurgle for whatever reason, and Talos brazenly rejecting all of them. Soon after, the assault was countered by the Blood Angels. Talos, somehow surviving his Warp-born vision quest, would awaken and eventually convince Vandred the Exalted to retreat from the battle to save their company.
Sometime later, Talos would organize an assault of a Calidus assassin temple after torturing one of its members for the temple's location. Upon successfully invading the temple, he claimed the prize he was after, which was hologram footage of his father in his final moments, footage that brought many Astartes to tears, giving many the closure they desired, including Talos himself.
Talos would then convince his demon-possessed captain, Vandred the Exalted, to seek refuge in the Maelstrom under the tyrannical rule of Huron Blackheart. They would then negotiate with Blackheart to help with repairing their ship, the Covenant of Blood. In payment for their refuge, they were to join the assault of the Fortress Monastery of the Marines Errant. The Night Lords would focus on sabotaging the fortress defences, later allowing Huron to lead his forces into the temple.
After the siege, Talos would work with Vandred the Exalted and the disgruntled Red Corsair apothecary Variel to reclaim the Echo of Damnation, a strike cruiser the Red Corsairs had stolen from the Night Lord Legion. The reclamation did not go unnoticed, however. As the Red Corsairs sent a retribution fleet to halt them, Vandred the Exalted would sacrifice himself and the Covenant of Blood to assure his company's safety and escape.
Talos would later suffer from visions for 6 whole months that left him wandering the dark corridors of the vessel. His brothers thought it would be best to chain him to his command throne until the visions were over. During this time, he had ordered the warband to make voyage to the eastern fringe where the Night Lord's second home laid, Saguelsa, finding after 10,000 years that it had been repopulated by the Imperium, which enraged him to no end.
The forces of the 8th Legion would make planetfall with the intent of exterminating the Imperial squatters, washing over the barren planet, killing and destroying all that they found. However, it would not last long, as they would be assaulted by the Ultramarines' second founding successor, Genesis Chapter, forcing them to retreat and engage in void warfare. The Loyalists would board the Echo of Damnation, and First Claw would meet Champion of the Genesis Chapter in melee combat. After a brief and embarrassing fight for First Claw, Zarl would arrive, taunting the Loyalist champion into a duel, defeating him and saving First Claw, but died of his wounds. Zarl's death would deeply hurt Talos, as the two had grown up together in the streets of Nostromo.
Seeking his revenge, the grieving Talos had the Genesis Chapter's ship annihilated by unleashing a payload of cyclonic torpedoes at the moon the chapter had been using as cover. The following space debris set the stage for Talos and his crew to obliterate the injured Genesis Chapter vessel. The Night Lords made landfall and had every psychically attuned mortal tortured and killed by his navigator's third eye, which stirred the warp and sent it as a message to thousands of worlds, plunging them into darkness, essentially blacking out an entire sector. Later, the Ulfari Eldar would arrive along with the Phoenix Phoenix Lord Jane Zar, who was sent to stop Talos as he was foreseen as a threat to Ulfri.
Talos would lead the warband to engage the Eldar below the old Night Lord fortress. A grueling and bloody battle would see most of, if not all of its marines die at the blades of the howling banshees. First Claw would be one of the ones to fight the Phoenix Lord herself. In the end, Talos would sacrifice himself using several crack grenades to blow himself up and Jane Zar, killing them both. However, Varial, the aforementioned Red Corsair turned Night Lord, would survive the battle and go on to reclaim First Claw's gene seed to carry on their legacy, Talos' legacy, to another, Decimus.
A character that has been long awaited by all Night Lord fans, the true heir to the throne of Nox.
You know, we've kinda just done a summarized version of the Night Lord's Omnibus.
Of course. Well, you know, as I always say, there are two kinds of people, Night Lord fans and those who just haven't read the omnibus yet.
For my character, I actually sneakily chose two characters. These are Shazo and Shazla Case. They are by far the two most distinguished killers of the Tau, and in my opinion they are probably supposed to be the same person. Starting with a lower in rank, Shazla Case is the protagonist in Fire Warrior, and was my first favorite Warhammer character. In the book Fire Warrior, based off of the video game, Shazla Case survives through an entire war almost entirely alone. Throughout the story, he becomes number and number, until he's become nothing but a weapon. Case is sent to rescue an Ethereal, and in doing so racks up a kill tally that likely no other Fire Warrior has or ever will even come close to. He is Doom, an invincible and unstoppable force of nature that cuts through the Imperial forces as an emotionless murder machine. He single-handedly takes out tanks along with droves of guardsmen, and even survives encounters with Space Marines and retains his will when faced with chaos. He is shot in the head, but fate appears to be with him as the bolt fails to detonate and he lives. Case actually teams up with an Ultramarine near the end of the book, and together they defeat a Lord of Change. At the end of the story, Case's mind is shattered, and he has sustained extremely grievous injuries, yet he survives the war and his mind is likely pieced back together thanks to Tau technology. Shazo Case is the Tau protagonist you see in Dawn of War Dark Crusade. At this point in time, he is an effective commander and merciful diplomat, which is surprising given his true nature as a lone warrior. While the Blood Ravens win the day, Case proves himself an incredibly skilled warrior within his XV-22 stealth battlesuit. Case is later seen as one of Commander Puretide's students. Along with Oshazera and Oshova, he is the greatest hero the Tau have to offer. With Puretide, he further masters the way of the army of one, the Monad. He becomes a living weapon, a being of ice-cold efficiency with little care of anything but how to better kill. Even to the other two pupils, he is off-putting and often can be hard to work with. Yet, at one point, he was their friend. Whoever that Case was is now long gone, however. After the Kronos campaign, he was placed into cryostasis to be awakened for the victory of the Furios Sept, then again to be unleashed upon the Dark Angels. Importantly, during the time between the two latter conflicts, his mind was kept awake for 100 years. This, of course, is enough to drive any man insane. It had brought Case into a particular razor-sharp and lethal edge of insanity. During this 100 years, he lived within his mind, devising tactics to defeat every single known enemy of the Tau Empire. Without any physical training, his skills were honed to beyond the point any Tau could or ever will hope to achieve. When unleashed, he slaughtered so many of the Space Marines that they resulted in orbitally bombarding him, and not even this could kill the Monad. He is a cold-hearted killer who is not even truly Case anymore. He is nothing but a weapon. Anger, hatred, unmatched skill, unwavering fearlessness, and a psychotic, invincible, iron-sharp will to do nothing but slaughter. Case cannot be reasoned with. He cannot be controlled, only let loose to do his bloody work. He is by far the most terrifying Tau adversary, and certainly their greatest warrior. He is the perfect Monad, and his current whereabouts are unknown. Now, these obviously sound like the same character, right? Unfortunately, if we go solely off the 40k timeline, they are not, for Puretide is dead 200 years before the Fire Warrior video game takes place. Along with this, Case means skillful and is a relatively common nickname. However, it is my personal belief that due to Fire Warrior being some of the very first Tau lore, along with Puretide's story only really emerging now in the new Farsight novels, and the large doubt that the people making the video game were overly concerned with the dates, that there is a high chance they are the same individual. Shazla and Shazo Case are both the exemplars of the Monad, and are warriors whose minds have been broken, who have abandoned all reason and become numb to everything, with the only desire to be a weapon. If GW cared enough to actually write about him more than 3 times, we could see Case body some people in 40k. I'm hoping they go back to his story someday, only time will tell.
Karl Franz, Emperor of the Empire of Man, Leader of Men, Electricon of Reichland, Wielder of Galmaraz, Prince and Emperor. Need I say more? Yes, actually, I must, because when I am called upon to explain my love for a Warhammer character, as Mr. Bones has for this video, I cannot hold myself back from going on about the one, the only, Karl Franz. Karl Franz was born into his world just like you, and while he may have been saved by Wood Elves because they saw he was destined for greatness, his greatness was not handed to him on a silver platter like 90% of other Warhammer characters. He was not given the best genetic enhancements and whatnot like every Space Marine character that's totally unique and cooler than the other ones. No, really, guys. He was not born into a race that's in one way or another especially good at war, like Ghazghkull or Grimgor Ironhide. He was born a simple man and would rise to the challenge on every occasion. During the election which would see him crowned as emperor, he did not want the mantle, showing his humility beyond most other Warhammer characters. In spite of that, he displayed the finest politics the world had ever seen, managing to convince every single elector count that they had come away with Franz's favor over all the others. He fought against the vile forces of chaos and greenskins before he was even crowned emperor, slaughtering a spider that was the size of an apartment complex by leaping atop it like he was an Attack on Titan character and jamming a sword through its brain. And his accomplishments don't stop there. His new role was met with challenge after challenge, and he met them all head-on. When Norskin raiders attacked the northern coast of the Empire, he was waiting for them on the advice of the Celestial College, and drove them back into the sea from whence they came. Whenever the electoral counts began causing a problem within the Empire, he would resolve the issue without a drop of blood spilled. And when the Orcs descended against the Empire from Blackfire Pass as they did against Sigmar thousands of years ago, Karl Franz marched forward and defended it just as his god once did. He personally slew the Orc war boss in charge with the power of Sigmar himself, routing the Horde and securing the Empire's future once again. And you know what? It wasn't easy for him. You think all these battles were going nice and smooth for him with zero difficulties? Hell no. He fought with all his might and on numerous occasions nearly died, especially at Blackfire Pass. Because Karl Franz, while he is awesome in a very human way. The Orc warboss nearly beat him to death, and it was only direct intervention from Sigmar himself that won the day. Now the stupid among you may go, and that's why he isn't as cool as my Space Marine special character 5,024,000,000, because he can fight all the Chaos Gods and win. That guy is a loser. Karl Franz suffers, he struggles, and through the sheer power of human determination, he wins. The same general reason people like the Guard is why Karl Franz's victories are better than those of anyone else in the settings. But even having said that, some of those fellas have their wins come across less as determination and skill and more as plot armor. Not Karl Franz, and as proof, you can experience for yourself how his victories are through skill and bravery. Because Total Warhammer is a thing, and by Sigmar's hairy balls does he have to fight for every inch there. The Elector Counts hinder him at every step, sometimes outright with civil war, and that's to say nothing of the Norskin raiders that show up on his shores every few minutes, or whatever the latest bullshit Manfred is trying to pull. You can see for yourself that Karl's victories aren't plot armor, but hard-fought battles through strategy, bravery, and sheer skill. And as tragic as the end times are, and as much as I wish they didn't happen, Karl got quite the honor during them, for it was he who was chosen to be the vessel for Sigmar's return to the mortal world. Out of every single human in existence, from the most noble of electors to the lowliest of peasant, it was Karl Franz who was chosen to house the very essence of a god in his body. Which, curious, the only other character in my mind that's truly happened with was Guilliman. That's right, the only other character to have a god outright inhabit their body was a superhuman demigod built to be beyond anyone else, and Karl was considered to be something just as good for that same purpose. Let me just conclude by saying this. Karl Franz isn't special because Games Workshop wrote him a backstory decrying him as the result of genetic magic, ancient prophecies, or the will of some god or other. All he has on the battlefield that makes him special is a fancy hammer and some good armor. Karl Franz is special because the moment something goes wrong, he's there to stop it with the best interest of everyone in mind. All of his people, all of his allies, his friends and family, he fights for the Empire of Man and the forces of good, however great the morality of those forces may ultimately be in the setting of Warhammer. He wakes up despite everything he has to face in the terrible world he lives in, and step by step does what he can to ensure the light lasts just a little bit longer in the darkness. While in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium there's only war, and in the Age of Sigmar armies fight in the ruins of what once was after the Age of Chaos bowled everyone over, Karl's from a different time. A time where one man can pick up a sword, fight back against the greatest threats the world has to throw at him, and win. And that, dear viewer, is something no other Warhammer character does quite like Karl Franz. And he rides a griffin, dude! Griffins are the coolest fantasy mount. Everyone and their mothers are like, I want a dragon, or I want this fancy horse. But nah, man, that's baby stuff. Grown-ups like Franz ride griffins, and the one he rides is named Deathclaw. That's awesome! Oh, what, you think that's overdoing it? The name Deathclaw is a bit too much? Too edgy? Fuck you. Griffins are awesome. Deathclaw is awesome. Get Galmaraz, you dork.
Sit. I insist. My name is Tracing the Infinite. Necron Overlord. Pharaon. Archaeovist of the Solemnus Galleries, in which we currently are. Why am I called the Infinite? Simple. One of me gets killed, another one rises. Like one of your Primarchs, I do believe. I am a purveyor of artifacts, a collector, a protector of events and histories, and things that need liberating from other races. I am not a warlord like so many of my kin. I simply aim to collect the history of the universe and protect it from outside influences. Right here on this tomb world, for example, I have things of which the value is not known. Priceless artifacts. The ossified husk of an enslaver. A giant of a man clad in Baroque power armor. The fabled Wraithbone choir of the Asturiani Altanzer craft world. Something you may know, the preserved head of Sebastian Thor. Have you ever heard of him? Perhaps not. But you may have heard of Fulgrim, Primarch of the Humans. I have a clone here, somewhere, before he was tainted by chaos. My galleries are ever growing, ever expanding, for history is always on the march, and I aim to keep pace, no matter what stands in my way. You are much the same, General Creed. Humanity paves the way forward on the corpses of many. If there is one who understands me, it is the humans. Why am I telling you all this? Simple, my dear General. Sometimes even I get bored when walking through my galleries, and I strike up a conversation with someone in a Tesseract labyrinth, a quaint little trinket in which you can keep people and events, and they will just play on a loop. Such is the case with you. The second I step out of this Tesseract from which you cannot escape, you will forget everything, and time as you know it starts again. Rest easy, Lord Creed. You will not die. You will never die. Ah, it appears I must leave you to your own devices. A scouting party has word of an artifact of great importance to me. You may have heard of it. The Spear of Vulcan.
Now, we've been talking a lot in this video about Warhammer characters, but what about John Warhammer himself? Hi, I'm Conan the Harlequin, and you might know me as the host of Live from the Black Library, and I want to talk to you about the Emperor of Mankind. Now, the Emperor is, funnily enough, known as the closest thing Warhammer 40,000 has to a protagonist. He is the central character of the setting, which is ironic because, narratively speaking, the Emperor isn't much of a character. He occupies the narrative niche known as the force of nature, when a character is less of a character and more so exists through their ubiquitous presence across a series or setting, and as such is felt everywhere and mentioned all the time, while we ourselves, the viewer, get very little insight into their personal thinking, their motivations, and their history, only being drip-fed in rare occasions. And that's what makes him so interesting. I would actually say the Emperor is the most interesting character, at least to me, in any fictional setting. I actually said as much in one of those rare occasions I posted on Reddit, where someone replied to me stating that they really couldn't see it, and that to them the Emperor was just a boring character, whose entire personality could be boiled down to the ends justify the means. And I would actually say that the reality couldn't be further from the truth. To me, calling the Emperor a boring character is like calling a black hole boring, because yes, it has gravity, but all you're really looking at is a big empty circle. However, you say that while standing in its event horizon, and you're clearly not thinking about the wider implications. Firstly, let's talk about the history and origins of the Emperor as we know them. You see, the Emperor was born around 8000 BC in ancient Anatolia, what is now Turkey, meaning that in the current setting of M42, he is almost exactly 50,000 years old, making him almost certainly the oldest living being in the galaxy aside from the Necrons. Now, there is some debate as to what the Emperor's origins are, but as far as we can tell, he's a naturally occurring mutant, one of the few perpetuals or immortals known as Homo Superior, and he was arguably the most powerful of them all. His earliest memories consist of him in actually a cave, where he saw hunters making plans by drawing animals and spears, and then marking the plans with their handprint, thereby signifying I was here and I made this. This instilled in him his values for top-down authority and central planning. His other earliest memory is him killing his uncle, because his uncle had actually murdered his father by stabbing him. So he took his father's skull, cleaned it to a shine, and then presented it to his uncle, thereby deliberately inducing a fatal heart attack. From there, he would travel throughout human history as an immortal, committing such feats as toppling the Tower of Babel, which contained a full dictionary of Enuncia, the language that can affect the fabric of reality, where he fought alongside his War Master and fellow Perpetual Alanius Persson against the Proto-Cognitae. Why the hell am I trying to do this in 5 minutes? As well as assume various identities throughout history, such as Alexander the Great and St. George, and live throughout the Dark Age of Technology, wherein he would eventually travel to a planet called Molech, where there was a warp rift that allowed him to traverse into the realm of chaos and steal power from the Chaos Gods directly, thereby giving him his immense might, as well as the knowledge he needed to create the Primarchs, and then eventually the Space Marine Legions, which he would use to launch the Great Crusade, despite the fact that the Primarchs were scattered and out of his reach. So, after fighting for nearly 700 years to unify the entire planet Earth with his Thunder Warrior Legions, who he would then betray with his Custodes and Constantin Valdor, he would launch the Great Crusade with the Space Marines, and then one by one find his Primarch sons, all the while manipulating and using people for his own ends, which were effectively a greater good, be they fellow Perpetuals like Erda, the mother of the Primarchs, or humans like Amar Astarte, the chief geneticist behind the Space Marine project, and even crafting his sons to be able to take the burdens away from him, suffer on his behalf, and even die on his behalf. This comes from the words of Malkador the Sigillite, by the way, his chief confidant and probably only real friend in the galaxy. However, nothing lasts forever, because after he left the Great Crusade in the hands of his favorite son Horus to return to Terra so that he could finish the Webway project to free humanity's reliance on warp travel, Horus would fall to chaos and betray him, launching the Horus Heresy, which would plunge the galaxy into 7 years of brutal civil war. And by the end of it, he would come to finally recognize his sons as real people and true sons unto themselves, shining souls who will develop and go their own way. But it was too little too late, because Horus was dead, Sanguinius was dead, the galaxy was destroyed, and the Emperor himself was mortally wounded, now forever interned upon the Golden Throne life support system, where he can keep the Astronomica invisible and communicate with humanity through whispers, suggestions, and quote-unquote miracles, all while effectively losing his mind as his remaining loyal sons disappeared from the galaxy one by one, causing the Imperium they built together to backslide into superstition, stagnation, and religious zealotry. The Emperor, the great secular warlord leader, now sits interred on the Golden Throne for 10,000 years, where the Imperium has come to worship him as a god, and this worship has actually empowered him greatly, so he is at his strongest and also at his most vulnerable. So now, with the throne failing and him communicating to his sons like Lionel Johnson and Gilliman, such as guiding the Lion's reawakening and channeling his strength through Gilliman to strike directly at Nurgle's garden, one can only wonder what's in store for John Warhammer himself. And this is what makes him so interesting as a character, wondering where he will come up next in the setting, especially when an author writes a major novel, or theorizing on whether or not he has truly become a god like some people, including myself, believe, as well as asking very real questions about his motivations and the way he went about things. Was he a deeply arrogant person, or was he just out of touch after having lived for so long? Was he right to rule the galaxy as he did to stop chaos, or was he a bloody-handed tyrant who flew too close to the sun and is responsible directly for everything that has come after in the past 10,000 1,000 years of misery and strife. I'd love to hear what you guys have to think in the comments below, and until then, I will see you in the next video.
Heya, I'm Mishmash, and Magnus the Red is probably one of my favorite characters in the entire setting. He truly embodies the Greek tragedy theme of 40k exceptionally well. He's an all-powerful demigod born of the literal creator of humanity and one of the most formidable psychers in the known universe, but all of those gifts ultimately caused his undoing. He was an overthinker and an overachiever, constantly in pursuit of knowledge and the answers to life's great mysteries. And all that aspiration led to what he is now. A man completely ruled and undone by his own nature and complete lack of self-control. His undeniable brilliance would end up going to his head plenty of times, and in the words of the Great Wise One, some of the most intelligent otters I've ever met are completely lacking in common sense. He's basically if Fraser Crane had psionic abilities well beyond comprehension. His infatuation with the warp soon became an addiction. Even after the Emperor warned him of the dangers of exploring the warp, he just kept nosing around. Hell, even Perturabo tried his hand in dissuading Magnus. He built a device that basically allowed anyone and everyone to look into the warp, at Magnus's request of course, and had him come to his home planet to show it off and then smashed it into a million pieces. Unfortunately, this just did more harm than good. Also pretty depressing that Perturabo literally poured his heart out to help his brother and it fell on deaf ears. Now you're probably thinking, Mishmash, why do you like this character? He sounds like a jackass. He has so much potential but ends up putting that potential to the worst possible ideas and decisions. But I think this is why I like him so much though. He's quite relatable because of his discontent with just going with the flow in a lot of ways. I find him to be one of the more human-like Primarchs in that he just can't be satisfied with just accepting the universe's rules at face value. He needed to know why and how. And being that he's probably one of the most unique Primarchs, I can't blame him. Too much. No, make no mistake, I know this guy's an asshole. Despite what you may think about Magnus so far, he was actually incredibly wise. And it wasn't as if he was some sort of social pariah to his brothers. Well, some at least. What truly seemed to mentally cripple him were decisions of great importance. He seemed to get completely stun-locked and his brain would do a septuple backflip anytime he was tasked with making a choice that would drastically impact the flow of the galaxy. Which is kind of understandable, I guess. I mean, come on, he could have clearly just sent a text to the Emperor on how his brother was completely losing his marbles and ready to wage war, and maybe not brain blast through the Imperial Palace, unleashing a shitload of demons, sacrificing several innocent psychers in the process, just so he could tell him in person and look like a giant human torch. The more I reminisce about this character, the less and less I sympathize with him, but I don't know, I can't help but love him. Speaking of the Emperor, I think their relationship is easily the most heartbreaking aspect of Magnus' story, besides Perturabo, of course. The Emperor was rather robotic in his love for his sons, but he and Magnus shared a special bond. During the Emperor's crusade to find his lost sons, he and Magnus actually telepathically communicated years before they met in person. During this time, the Emperor actually tried to help guiding and sharpening Magnus' psionic potential. The relationship is always interesting to me, as I really did feel the Emperor had a deep connection with Magnus. It could be easily argued that the Emperor just did this for his own sake and for the sake of humanity, but he did warn Magnus on numerous occasions of the dangers of underestimating the warp, even for a being as powerful as he was. There were parts of the warp that even the Emperor wouldn't tread. But we all know Magnus. Not exactly one to heed good advice. Magnus meant well and had foreseen the nightmarish future of what was to come, but his good intentions mean very little when the damage has been done. Not just the damage caused between his relationship with the Emperor, the destruction of his own planet, essentially the project that would give humanity a fighting chance against chaos. Magnus lost his humanity, a literal piece of him known as the Noble Shard. The shards of Magnus are basically puzzle pieces to Magnus' very soul. Once he had lost the Noble One, his downfall was inevitable, as this single piece was basically the one thing keeping him in check. Magnus wasn't a bad guy. He was content with his brother killing him, knowing if he and his beloved legion were dead, Tzeentch couldn't use him as pawns. But without the shard, he quickly changed his mind and then he got his spine snapped. The turmoil within him after the literal glassing of his home planet was like a mixed bowl of shit soup. This insight to his character is why I like him. He isn't just some egotistical maniac that didn't care about his actions, he wanted to help his father, he wanted to do the right thing. He felt his decisions during the burning of Prospero were for the benefit of the Imperium and his father. But after a failed attempt at recovering the Noble Shard, his ascension, or rather descension, into demonhood was complete. The man once known as Magnus was dead. His mind was completely molded into the worst aspects of his personality. He's now a bitter, arrogant, conniving red bastard who now serves as a champion for a sniveling mass of craft macaroni. Even as I wrote this, I kinda had to think to myself why I was so enthralled by this character. How could I like Magnus despite how much he fucked up? But I can't help but sympathize with him. Some people just kinda crumble under immense pressure and will zig when the clear best course of action is to zag. And hell, I completely understand why people hate his guts. I like him and he still pisses me off. But it's undeniable that his contribution to the story is why we have the universe we have now. His decisions were a key factor in the culmination of the grimdark state of the galaxy. You know, the true main theme of the setting. And it's why I love the franchise. I really think he's a brilliantly written character, and the amount of people who are split on between hating him and loving him show that. This may be a bit of a stretch, but I think the reason I like him so much is he has kind of a Vader quality to him. Two men with seemingly limitless potential and enormous ego being manipulated into committing atrocities via good intentions. Obviously, one has had his story come to a close and he had returned to the light, but Magnus isn't quite there and he doesn't seem like he ever will. But if the Emperor thinks Mr. Stanko here can be redeemed, I'm inclined to believe that Maggie can too. But yeah, that's why I like the dude. I've been Mishmash, check me out at Mishmash Painting, and thank you very much to Arthur for having me on here. I really appreciate it. And don't forget to Mishmash, Kit Bash, and paint some fantastic miniatures. And you're gonna, I promise. See ya.
What is wrong with you? Why are you blue? Ugh.
Hey guys, my name's Nick Gikas, and apart from being a voice actor, please hire me, I need food. I make 40K parody videos on my YouTube channel, including the series My Big Golden Buddy. Check it out sometime. As someone who loves the Imperial Guard, I'm gonna tell you about Olanius Pius. Now the story of Olanius has split into 3 variations over the years, but the one constant is that he was a member of the Imperial Army. For those that don't know, the Imperial Army was basically the predecessor of the Imperial Guard during the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy. In the first iteration of the legend, Olanius Pius was an average guardsman whose reputation came from the climactic battle between the Emperor and Horus. When Horus prepared to deliver the killing blow to the crippled Emperor, Pius bravely stepped in between them in an effort to save the Emperor. That ended as well as you can imagine.
Let the Emperor alone!
Pius's sacrifice was enough to make the Emperor realize just how far his son fell to chaos, and promptly slew him. As a result of his actions, Pius eventually ascended into sainthood within the Imperial Guard. In fact, the highest military honor a guardsman can be awarded is the Order of Olanius Pius. Think of it like the Grimdark Medal of Honor. Next we have Olanius, or Ol, Person. While Person was also a guardsman, he was a soldier for most of his life, which began around 15,000 BC, making him older than the Emperor by thousands of years. Like the Emperor, Person was a perpetual, meaning he was essentially immortal. Person lived and fought through all of recorded human history, including the Napoleonic Wars, World War I, the First Gulf War, and others. He was supposedly one of the Argonauts as well. Even more astounding is that he fought alongside the Emperor himself as his war master, long before the Primarchs even existed. Another interesting fact about Person is that he still holds on to his religion despite living in the then atheist Imperium. Person was Catholic and wore what appears to be a crucifix on a necklace. This religion seems to be based off of the real world's Catholicism. On the planet Kalt where he retired to, people knew about his religious beliefs and referred to him as Pius Ol. There's a lot more to Olanius Person's story, but we're on network time, and there's a whole slew of people that can explain it better than me. So let's move on to the final iteration. Ollie Piers, short for Olanius, was a guardsman tasked with defending the Eternity Wall spaceport during the Siege of Terra. While Piers and his fellow guardsmen were defending a bridge, they were charged by a space marine of the World Eaters Legion. At that moment, Piers was assisting the other guardsmen in holding up a banner of the Emperor. As they fired upon the World Eater, they prayed to the Emperor for deliverance, hoping that by holding up his banner, they would be saved. Lo and behold, Janisha Kroll of the Sisters of Silence appeared and swiftly struck down the World Eater, saving Piers and his fellow guardsmen. During this time, Piers was accompanied by a Remembrancer by the name of Hari Har. While Har was chronicling the event, Piers implored him to write that Piers wasn't protecting a banner of the Emperor, but the Emperor himself, and that he wasn't being attacked by a Space Marine, but by Horus. Piers explained that soldiers tell lies in order to create legends on the battlefield and instill hope among their brothers in arms. As a member of the Imperial Guard thousands of years later, what could be more inspiring than hearing the Emperor was saved by a guardsman just like you? As the spaceport was falling, Piers found himself defending yet another banner displaying the Emperor's image. But this time, he wasn't being attacked by a Space Marine. He was now staring down Angron, the Primarch of the World Eaters. Unfortunately, no one would come to intervene. With cojones made out of ceramite, Piers held his ground and opened fire as the Red Angel charged with fury. Ollie Piers' last words were, "Throne of Terror!" But no matter which story is truly canon, Alanius was a guardsman's guardsman, fighting the good fight against seemingly impossible odds for a human that isn't a bio-enhanced super soldier. Person may be a perpetual, but there are ways to kill perpetuals. But one thing rings true in the hearts of all guardsmen. The flesh of a human may wither and die, but the spirit is forever indomitable.
Greetings, noble natives!
Dogehammer here for a little bit of story time. Today I bring you the tale of one Captain Adanaxis of the Blood Ravens. He only to my knowledge shows up in a single short story in the 2019 issue of White Dwarf, which I still own. But to understand the story of Adanaxis, first thing we need is a little bit of context. For those of you who don't know, the Blood Ravens are the starring chapter of the Dawn of War series, RTS from the early 2000s. A lot of shenaniganery went down in those games. They may or may not have accidentally released a demonic entity on Tartarus.
Human, do not destroy the stone! You will doom us all!
It'll probably be fine. Went to Kronos and beat up the Eldar, Word Bearers, Orcs, Cow, Necron, and even the Imperial Guard at the same time on the same planet just to protect some relics.
Cold, dead, gauntlet, dastardly witch!
They lost half their chapter in the Korova campaign.
Korova was a huge mistake.
Held back a Tyranid splinter fleet with like 30 Marines before realizing bug spray is a good trick. They then lost a chunk of their chapter to Chaos because they didn't clue in that their chapter master being spat out of the warp after being lost for hundreds of years and saying, "I'm not corrupt, bro, trust me," is kinda suspicious. The Loyalists did manage to win that civil war and then go on to defeat the Black Legion. Then something happened in Dawn of War 3, I'm sure.
You!
Also, Abaddon had a tantrum at Cadia sometime after this, so now the Great Rift is a thing, cutting the Blood Ravens off from the wider Imperium. So in short, the Blood Ravens went through the ringer and were pretty beat up. But unlike some chapters who do things like tactically retreat to assess their situation,
Oh, take your seatbelt off, you Mary.
the Magpies didn't hold back to recoup their numbers. They went on the attack like a gaggle of German dudes on special chocolate. Cut to the strike cruiser, the Glory of Calderis. Captain Adanaxis is just vibing after knocking some heads on the planet of Gadara.
Show me your dicks.
Suddenly, Adanaxis gets a hail from an incoming Tyrant-class cruiser designated the Argent. Now, normally, this wouldn't be a concern. Except for, did I forget to mention, turns out the Argent is a f***ing Adeptus Custodes ship. Now, I hear some of you saying, Doge, they're on the same team. Why is it such a big deal? You gotta think about it from the perspective of the demigod kleptomaniacs here for a second. All they're realistically aware of right now is that the galaxy is cut in half by a warp storm for some reason. They have no knowledge of Guilliman waking up. They don't know what a Primaris Marine is, and they ain't never heard of no Indominus Crusade. These boys were still firmly living in 7th edition 40k while the rest of the setting had moved on to 8th. So there's Captain Adanaxis on the bridge, watching this random Custodes ship appear out of thin air.
Hello, motherfucker.
And I can't lie, I know deep down this man was sweating. As far as Adanaxis is concerned, the Custodes only ever really leave Terra in the rarest and most dire of circumstances. In other words, somebody must have screwed the pooch big time. So an envoy of about 5 Custodes come aboard the Glory of Calderis, and they see the weary and battered state of the Blood Ravens, and are just like...
light work, no reaction.
They are not impressed by the Magpie's battle scars, and start to do the typical Custodes diplomatic strategy of shut up, do what I say, simply talking to you plebeians has me on the verge of vomiting. And Captain Adanaxis is just like,
I beg your pardon?
He is not taking this disrespect lightly. The Blood Ravens captain decides to bow up to the Custodes, refusing to get sunned by the Golden Banana Man, and starts going on a rant about how he and the Blood Ravens have been out in the trenches doing the real work, while he and the Custodes have presumably just been faffing about on Terra. Now you'd think the result of a Space Marine chattering back to a Custodes like this would have resulted in something like... But no, the Custodes simply hits Adanaxis with the old reliable, don't care, didn't ask, touch grass. The Custodes starts to explain that Guilliman has been resurrected, what a Primaris Space Marine is, that they're delivering a buttload of gene seeds so they can make some of their own, the whole shebang. But once again, in typical Custodes fashion, he manages to deliver this information in the most dickish and condescending way possible. Now, the Blood Ravens act pretty much how you'd think they would at such a revelation, pretty much in disbelief over what they were just told. However, Adanaxis is still just taken completely aback by the audacity of this bitch. He was not ready to get over it. Adanaxis was close to resorting to the hold me back bro method. However, our boy decides to hit them with one of the coldest threats I have ever read.
The Blood Ravens have stood steadfast with the Imperium for thousands of years. We will not tolerate being spoken to in such a manner. I have 60 warriors to your 5. 5 ships to your 1, and you are on the wrong side of the rift. You never did say how you crossed it.
Adanaxis pretty much on no uncertain terms told the Custodes that if he doesn't check himself, he's about to disappear. Even the Blood Ravens librarian at this point has to step in and telepathically tell Adanaxis to chill the hell out and stop antagonizing the Custodes. It's just not the move. Now, I know there are some Custodes fans watching this and thinking, 60 Marines versus 5 Custodes?
I like those odds.
Let's just think about this for a moment. Even if the 5 Custodes managed to slay every single Blood Raven on the Glory of Calderis, which they very likely could do, they're still outnumbered 5 ships to 1. It doesn't matter how skilled those 5 warriors are when the torpedoes start flying and they all get spaced. The Custodes tries to put up a front by replying that he doesn't care about Adanaxis' threat, but come on, bro. I see right through you. You can't lie to me. I know deep down this Custodes knew full well that Adanaxis had him backed into a corner, and this was emphasized by just how quickly he ends the conversation. They immediately just dump the gene seed and get the hell out of Dodge. And that's pretty much it. The story goes on for another page, basically just outlining the Blood Ravens' thought process on how they're stoked that they have the opportunity to study this gene seed, maybe gain a little bit of insight on who their Primarch might be. But the story wraps itself up here. Now, compared to some of the other characters in this video, the story of Adanaxis might seem quaint by comparison. Well, dear viewers, considering the regular response to an Astartes getting uppity around a Custodes is this? Anyone who can punk out the Emperor's favorite banana boys is instantly a Giga Chad in my books and is worth talking about. Anyways, that's it for me. Congratulations on reaching funny number, Arthur, and thanks for having me on your channel.
Thank you. F you. Bye.
Give
Gabriel Angelos is a man of conviction, and is easily one of the most Space Marine-y Space Marines to ever Space Marine, alongside the likes of Uriel Ventress, Garvia Loken, and Captain Titus, just to name a few. He is a brick. Tough, strong-willed, duty-bound, all of the things the archetypical Space Marine should be. Originally the captain of the 3rd Company of the Blood Ravens, and now its chapter master, he has had a storied and successful career, and has brought glory to the Blood Ravens many times over. However, the things he has had to do in the line of duty, while not dissimilar from most Space Marines, are difficult. He would be tasked with putting down a rebellion on his homeworld of Cyrene, only finding out his father was the one who orchestrated it, resulting in him not only executing his father personally, but ordering the exterminatus of his homeworld, something that still haunts him to this day. He had to execute his friend Isidore, who betrayed him during the conflict on Tartarus, and had to lead an insurrection against not only his chapter master, but his brothers in arms who fell under the purview of chaos. This to many, even to a Space Marine, would be difficult, but manageable. After all, it is a Space Marine's duty to fight for the Imperium and the Emperor, no matter who or what your enemy is. But to the Blood Ravens, knowledge is power, and they guard it quite well. Maybe a little bit too well. You see, Gabriel Angelos is not the typical chapter master, as the Blood Ravens do not know where they come from, and this isn't unique. Many chapters do not know their origins. But what they do because of this is interesting, as Angelos will often personally go out of his way to destroy any knowledge of their true origins to protect their brothers, himself, or both. For a man leading a chapter championing the power of knowledge, it's a bit hypocritical to destroy it. So what is that knowledge hiding? This is why Angelos is so fascinating to me. While he is a Space Marine archetype, he's cursed with knowledge, with guilt and regret due to the things he has done in the line of duty, and a purpose we may never fully understand. After all, it's far more likely that his somber demeanor in Dawn of War 3, which is highly different from that of Dawn of War 1 or 2, indicates not the proud man of before, but a jaded one just holding the line, both mentally and physically. Whatever his destiny is, he is certainly the man for the job, but that doesn't change the fact that he is far more than what meets the eye.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome to Voxcast to Nowhere. I'm Himbo Horus.
And I'm Ian from Hyperspace Hobbies.
And it's so awesome that we get to be part of this great collaboration. However, I got a hot take, Ian. I got a hot take real quick. Arthur, I'm sorry, but 10th edition ain't as bad as you think it is, man.
It's not that bad.
It's not that bad. It's gonna get better. It's okay. And you know what makes me so excited for 10th edition?
What's that?
It's the year 2024. We got a bunch of codexes coming out soon.
Yeah, you got some codexes coming out. Custodes coming out.
Oh, hell yes. Dark Angels, Oryx, Tau, Chaos Space Marines, but most importantly, you're right. My boys, the Custodes. Man, the Custodes. They're really expensive, I will say that. But they got some really cool characters, honestly. They don't have a lot, but they're really cool.
Well, besides Valorous and Valdor...
Oh, it's Valoris.
Damn. Besides Valoris and Valdor, are there any other Custodes whose names start with a V?
You know what? Funny enough, there is, and I think V might be their favorite letter at this point, because Valerian is that third one. And you know what? He's not very popular. Most people either don't really give a shit or just don't know who he is.
Well, I don't know anything about this guy, and I've never heard of him. Could you tell me more?
You know, I could, but it's not too much, but there is some cool stuff there. So, Valerian is a shield captain for the Custodes on Terra. He's actually... Originally, he was chosen to be part of the Hateran Guard.
What are the Hateran Guard?
So, the Hateran Guard, and I'm pretty sure I'm butchering the name of that, so you know what, we'll just call them the Companions, because that's their nickname. So basically they're like the personal attendants to Big E while he's on the throne. You know, his confidants, his hospice nurses.
But he failed, Shield Captain Valerian failed the test to become one of these guard. What happened there?
Yeah, so that was a pretty embarrassing moment. So he comes into the throne room and he basically passes the fuck out. It was really embarrassing. It's a big fail for everybody.
Okay, well, he sounds fairly interesting so far. What are some of his biggest deeds in the world of 40k?
So, for a while, he just had wall duty, at the Imperial Palace, until Great Rift happens, Gilliman wakes up, Khorne decides, fuck it, we ball, we're invading Terra today. So, get this. This guy, this absolute mad lad Valerian, was sent with some custodians and his best friend, Alea, and I consider them best friends because I really love these duo, but this isn't about her. Look, they killed a goddamn bloodthirster.
That's good. It's a pretty powerful guy we got here.
Pretty sick. Also helped take down a chaos cult. There's not much about him. There's just 2 books, The Watchers of the Throne duology by Chris Raitt, and honestly, they're okay. I mean, it was okay. It's just like, I wouldn't put it on any high tier list, and it's just not worth buying the audiobook. I'd say wait for a sale. However, I think that's probably the main problem with Valerian, and probably why he's not well known, is that one, he's relatively new. This is a guy who was made at the ass end of 8th edition, and only shares 2 books and nothing else. Thankfully, he's not dead. So there's always hope. So I think that's somehow his biggest flaw, but also the biggest opportunity, is that he doesn't have a lot of lore. If you go on Lexicanum, this guy's got a few paragraphs. You could read it in like 5 minutes while you're eating a turkey sub at Jersey Mike's. I don't know. But he has such opportunity to be bigger. I want him to be bigger. I want him to be like in my top 10 40k characters, Like, I want to remember him.
For not being the main character of these stories, his on-table persona, his actual rules in the game are very much main character style rules. He's got fantastic 40k stats.
Oh, hell yes. The guy is freaking sick. And you know what's the best part is? His model also comes with Alea,
which is very cool.
And in case I didn't make it clear, she is a Sister of Silence, and a badass one at that. I'm gonna throw her stat sheet up there just look at that. That's scary good. But him on tabletop, if you're playing Custodies, you have to have him. One, because Custodies are expensive as shit. Like, Jesus Christ, I think my student loans get high blood pressure looking at these points. For the amount of money you pay for them?
Yeah, his points aren't actually too bad for what you get from a model like this.
But Valerian is very much mandatory because, look at this. The hero of Lion's Gate. Look at that. That's just beautiful.
I think all in all, he's a pretty sound character with some pretty interesting backstory and some very awesome on-table rules.
And fingers crossed for some 10th edition update to him, because I want to see this man thrive, and I want to see him kick some ass with the Lion and Imperial Nihilus.
Yeah, give us more Valerian.
So, don't forget to check us out on Voxcast to Nowhere.
And check me out at Hyperspace Hobbies.
Also, a big thanks to Arthur for this humongous collaboration. Like, this is really cool.
Yeah, shout out.
So, once again, thanks for listening, and enjoy the rest of the video.
I never know what to say in these kind of things.
I'm keeping that in.
Emperor, damn it. Oh, for throne's sake, where the fuck have I ended up now? Oh, I'm in an Arthur Bones video. Well, I guess I better tell you about something exciting then. How about my favourite Astartes warrior and how he earned his title? You may or may not have heard of him, True Claw, last of the company of Russ, Bjorn the Fell-Handed. I first encountered Bjorn on the slightly chilly world of Fenris. He was a formidable warrior, embodying the rout's love of open, honourable combat. This is not to say that Bjorn was not cunning. Like all the wolves, his animalistic nature could enable him to be extremely devious when required, even if he did not enjoy it as much as the thrill of face-to-face combat. Bjorn mistakenly shot down the spacecraft of a conservator named Hauser, which thrust Bjorn into the centre stage for one of the most tragic performances mankind had ever seen. This This path would see him decimate civilizations such as the Elamic Quietude alongside his brothers of Tra Company, before being summoned by the Lord of Winter and War himself to witness the Council of Nicaea. During the council, Bjorn would do battle with the Thousand Sons captain Ammon. Shrewdly deceiving the Psyker, Bjorn was able to drive off the attack, saving the life of the Skjold of Tra. He was present at the burning of Prospero, where he took gleeful relish in rending through the one-eyed wizard's sons, who had dishonored their emperor by hubristically refusing to obey his diktat. Though his later deeds may be many and noble, Bjorn's actions upon the volcanic world of Grythe set him apart as one of the most valiant and skilled combatants in the history of the Imperium. As the Space Wolves Legion descended to hunt the Demon King alongside their Primarch Leman Russ, Bjorn was fated to be the first to face Arvax in open combat. Bjorn battled ferociously, using all of his centuries of training, skill, and animalistic ability, while the Wolf King and the other wolves slaughtered Arvax's horde of cornate cultists. As Russ rent through the crush of bodies, he witnessed the defeat of the Demon King at the hands of his son, Bjorn. Leman's eyes raised to see a fountain of demonic blood erupting from Arvax's neck as Bjorn, snarling, tore out the demon's throat with his trusty wolf claw. The Primarch's chest swelled with pride as he watched the demon crash to the ground defeated. He stood before Bjorn and exonerated him in front of the entire assembled host of wolves. Russ inducted the warrior of Tra into his personal wolf guard and bestowed upon him the name Fell-Handed, so that none may ever question Bjorn's accomplishments. Bjorn has always stood out to me for the simplicity of his mindset and the dryness of his humor, truly personifying the spirit of the Space Wolves. Simple, straightforward, and savage.
Hello, my name is Hal, and I run the Amber King channel, and I'm going to talk about a character that I feel gets a bad rap, and that is Mortarion. Quite appropriate, as I do currently have Nurgle's gift. I think many people complain because Mortarion is a giant hypocrite, and that many people will say that this makes him a bad character, or that he's like poorly written, and I believe they are entirely wrong. Mortarion is like many of the other traitor Primarchs, and he's ultimately a victim of his homeworld of Barbarous, that cursed, smelly, rotting place. Nikaer, his ghoulish adoptive father, really messes him up in ways that truly break his character and who he is as a person. And he becomes a freedom fighter for the people of Barbarous, and at the moment of his greatest achievement, where he's about to free the people, he meets the Emperor, who he believes antagonizes him into a trap that eventually enslaves him and his people to essentially a new tyrant with psychic powers. Ultimately, he's supposed to feel grateful for the Emperor saving his life, but yet, in the way, did the Emperor not place him in danger in the first place? And did the Emperor not let him get stolen and placed on Barbarous in the beginning as well by the Chaos Gods? I think Horus illustrates his ultimate failing as a character through his methods of war. His men are strong, they can endure, they defeat tyrants and Xenos threats, but the devastation they leave is a broken land and people all across the growing galaxy that Mortarion barely feels any sympathy for because they just have to survive and tough it out just as he did on Barbarous. And if they do not do this, then they are weak. He is essentially just a weapon. The Emperor sends this weapon out into the galaxy and somehow expects him to show sympathy and understanding and to show the finer points of civilization and empire building. And where was Mortarion meant to source this from? He didn't grow up like Guilliman or Horus, didn't have any personal attention from the Emperor, and yet we're all expecting him to somewhat be like Dawn or sanguineous like the others. Mortarion's hatred of psychers and the Emperor being a psyker himself ultimately blinds him. He is never quite rightly over the fact of his mistreatment as a child on Barbarous, who basically wants these tyrant psyker overlords to fall, and that's his only focus. That's all he cares about. That's all he's allowed to see. And as the Khan quite rightly tells him, he was so concerned about eradicating the psyker that now he is surrounded by them more than ever when he sided with Horus. It's further layered by the fact that he himself is a latent psyker, and in a way he views it as a corruption within himself, that little bit of, I'm part tyrant, evil, something is wrong with me. And I think when people complain about his hypocrisy when it comes to psychic powers and the warp, they say it's poor writing. But I challenge that, because in the real world, we are surrounded by hypocrisy. We see people act in ways in which is often confusing, and it's probably because we know it's in ways linked to trauma and shame, and we obviously can think of examples of how that's manifested. Mortarion mostly knows this about himself, and it's not poor writing. He just knows he's wrong. He knows that being chained to Nurgle, sucks. Angron doesn't even know what's happening. Magnus has embraced it. Fulgrim has truly embraced it. But Mortarion still sees the true picture and knows that he's truly messed up. But he's so far down that road that he just can't, there's no way to turn back. He can't undo everything that's happened so far. I think, again, real life examples, feel free to think of them in your head. I don't think that means that Mortarion is poorly written. He's an interesting character because of the fact that he's truly aware of how corrupted to a demon Primarch level of chaos, and yet still knowing, this kind of sucks, I don't really truly believe it, but I'm still going to espouse it no matter what. In fact, I would argue that there's not enough characters in 40k that recognize the hypocrisy of the different factions they exist within. I love the characters of Warhammer. I think there's so much complexity and understanding between many authors, even on one such as Mortarion, and I hope people do sort of walk away from this with he maybe isn't my favourite, but I don't think any of the Primarchs are that poorly written, except anyone who mentions Ferris, my poor boy.
So when Mr. Bones reached out to me about doing a collab on everyone's favorite characters, I told myself, you know what, I love a challenge. I'll let everybody else pick all of the good ones, and then I'll try to throw a curveball in the mix. And that's not exactly true. I tried to pick Trazyn and somebody else already got him. But anyways, when I was looking at the list of characters that had been claimed, I was surprised to see that nobody picked Fulgrim, which is also not 100% true. I mean, I get it. He's a whiny, vain, over-the-top narcissist. But if I'm being honest with you, I kinda love this guy. I've always been a fan of over-the-top, cartoonish villains. The ones that every single week come up with a new scheme to stick it to our protagonist, and every single episode ends with them shaking their fist in defeat, screaming that they'll get our hero next time. A subcategory of this type of villain that's always been a personal favorite of mine is the flamboyant dandy types. Your Jokers, the Monarchs, Jafars, Scars, Radigans, etc., etc. The villains that are capable of entertaining us with their antics in 1 minute, and then flip the script in another and chill us to the bone. Fulgrim fits this archetype perfectly, and in those early Heresy books, he presents himself as unbelievably charismatic and charming, with a sense of humor that's quite rare amongst his brothers. But as time goes on, he never really loses that side of him, but we start to see the cracks in his perfect veneer as Slaaneshi corruption starts worming its way through his soul. Whenever he's on screen talking to another character, especially a human character that's nowhere near as powerful as him, there's always this sense of unease, this deep feeling of imminent horror hiding just behind his perfect smile. Whether he be smiling, lip-twitching as he speaks to a mortal artist that managed to make a better sculpture than his own, or after Perturabo has smashed his face into a model titan and he's smiling through a broken nose and teeth stained red with blood. You never really know what's going on inside of his head. You never know how you're supposed to feel. And no other character in 40k is able to invoke in the audience such a palpable feeling of conflicted tension. He gets under your skin in a way that no other 40k character really can. Sometimes this dude is absolutely hilarious, like when he goes to get Perturabo's help to reclaim the Angel Exterminatus, and instead of just telling his brother his plan, he has to put on a show, a great theatrical performance, something that Perturabo finds deeply annoying. The entire time this is happening, the vein in his forehead is bulging to the point where it's about to burst. Other times, he's incredibly creepy and disturbing, like after he killed his brother Ferrus Manus at the Drop Site Massacre, and he ends up having his chief apothecary Fabius Bile clone his brother over and over, so that he can continuously try to convince the late Primarch that what the traitors are doing is the correct course of action, as something the clones continuously deny him. The situation always ends the same. Fulgrim lashes out and kills his brother again, and then orders Fabius to make another clone, every attempt pushing him deeper and deeper into madness. And bear in mind, this is all before he becomes a full-blown demon, and the creepness is kicked up to an entirely different stratosphere. I love Fulgrim as a character not because he's honorable or aspirational, but because he's so well written that he's capable of invoking such a wide range of emotions in the audience. He's hilarious and tragic, funny and disturbing, charming and horrifying. And to my horror and comedy-loving self, it's a genuine treat every single time he shows up. And in my opinion, he's one of 40K's most complex characters and easily one of the franchise's all-time greatest villains.
Hello there, my friends, and welcome. I am the Grimdark Narrator, and this is a little video I made in my collaboration with Mr. Bones40K and his channel. The theme of the project is picking up a favorite character from Warhammer and talking a bit about them. So, for my part in this, I chose none other than the Primarch of the unknowable Alpha Legion, Alfarius himself. Now, Alfarius, as most of you probably know, is one of the 18 sons of the Emperor, aka the Primarchs, and the leader of the 20th Legion. However, unlike any of the other Primarchs, Alfarius also has a twin brother, namely Omegon. And I think you can't really talk about the Alpha Legion without referring to both Alfarius and Omegon, at least when it comes to its command structure. The fact that throughout the Horus Heresy, both Alfarius and Omegon impersonated one another, as well as many other characters within the Legion and beyond, definitely doesn't help matters either. In fact, I would even dare say that Alfarius and Omegon, in multiple ways, are more or less a single entity when it comes to 40K lore. Which is why, for the sake of convenience, when I refer to Alfarius in this episode, it should be implied that I'm including Omegon as well. But onwards to the actual topic of the video and less of my rambling. Who is Alfarius really, and why is he one of my favorite characters? Alfarius is a master of subterfuge, espionage, manipulation, sabotage, and all things, overall considered, underhanded tactics. The Legion even apparently used these kinds of tactics long before they actually found the Primarch. But then again, Alfarius is surrounded by so much deliberate misdirection and mystery that he might have been in command all along, even before the Emperor discovered Horus, who was, supposedly, the first recovered Primarch. I, myself, am a person who definitely enjoys a good mystery, whether it's a detective serial killer story or something from the works of H.P. Lovecraft, where the element of the unknown itself is almost weaponized. So, an entity like Alfarius has always been right up my alley. I always like the aspects of theirs where they seem to manipulate anyone and everyone, and at the end of an operation or campaign or whatnot, they win just because they were the masterminds of all that happened. You thought you had free will, but you were just a tool of an Alpha Legion infiltrator. Especially in the early stage of the Horus Heresy saga, very little, if anything, is actually known or shown about Alfarius. The Legion always operated in the shadows, using sleeper agents, cat's paws, and much more than just simple Space Marine warriors. Whenever a story involved the Alpha Legion, there was always an atmosphere of just as planned, if you know what I mean. No matter who won, or what a character did or didn't do, it all seemed to be part of an Alpha Legion plot. And obviously at the heart of all these kinds of tactics was Alfarius himself. Now, if you know anything about the Horus Heresy or 40k in general, you probably know that the Primarchs of the Astartes were figures larger than life. You could simply not mistake them for one another or for any other Warhammer character. At the same time, Alfaria seemed to be entirely the opposite of this. He, or they really, if we're including Omegon, were said to be so unassuming that they could even pass as other regular Space Marines. They had their entire legion alter, sometimes via surgery, their physical appearance, so as to be as indistinguishable from each other and their Primarchs as possible. And all of that so they could say, "I am Alfarius," whenever someone asked them about their identity. And it definitely worked as well. There are multiple stories where there's no certainty whether a certain Alpha Legion character is or isn't a Primarch. However, like all good things, or in this case good mysteries, we did have to come to a point where it's revealed. And throughout the Horus Heresy, I'd say both Alfarius and the Legion would somewhat lose their unknowable, all according to plan luster. Alfarius eventually becomes more fallible, some of the Legion plans failed, and they became a bit more human, so to speak. Which is not a bad thing, mind you, as just having Alfarius be the unbeatable, infallible, omniscient, ever-present mastermind would have ended up being a bit cartoonish. I'm also not a very big fan of what happened to Alfarius before the beginning of the Siege of Terra. At that point, it just seems that he throws away anything that made the Legion work previously. And I'm saying that as someone who actually likes Rogel Dorn as well. I'm not gonna spoil what happens, but if you know, I'm just saying things were not just as planned. Now, all in all, there's a lot to be said and even more to be speculated about Alfarius at the end of the day. He's one of the most indirect and mysterious of all the Primarchs, and that's a reason why he was so appealing to me. Also, the Legion color, that aquamarine green, and their association with the Hydra and reptile motifs in general, was also a big plus. At the end of this, I hope you folks enjoyed my brief and personal foray into Alfarius and the 20th Legion. I also want to say thank you to Mr. Bones40k for inviting me to make this episode, and I suggest that everyone checks out his channel too, and also the shorts that are part of this project at the end. Until next time, the Emperor protects.
I'm Isyander.
And I'm Koda.
And today we're going to be covering Orokin and Guilliman.
Orokin and Guilliman,
in under 5 minutes each, which is doable.
Oh, very doable.
Yes. Guilliman is a tough one, and that's not my bias showing, because he's done a lot. There's a lot to Guilliman, so there is a real difficulty in picking where to start, and so I've decided there's no better place to start than the vacuum pit of depression that is his day-to-day life, because he's one of the Emperor's kids, 20, 21, 18, whatever number you want, were each made with a bespoke purpose, with some help from an Eternal, a human, the Emperor, Chaos, maybe, possibly 12 Shaman in a trench coat, whatever you want to believe. It's convoluted, it's difficult, they're almost impossible to replicate. What matters is they are all demigods, effectively. The distance between a Primarch to your average person is night and day, even on menial tasks, and each of them was given a kind of specialty, and sometimes the Emperor doubled up, hair and a spare kind of a deal, but usually they each had a complete mastery. There's some people who have complete control over the assault. They can win any war that they set their minds to, and it's horrifying. There are others who are masters of stealth. There are others who got hands made of metal. They were not all created equal. And others who got massive angelic wings and combat prowess that renders them almost immortal the moment they enter a battlefield. It wasn't fair, but it is what it is. And then there's the clones, you know, Mr. Siege Fortify and Fortify Siege. It's messy.
The Gork and Mork of the Imperium.
I can now not unsee Dorn and Perturabo as that, but they all have very different approaches, and not all of them have fair approaches. But Guilliman got it pretty good when it came to lining up for superpowers, you know? Like, some of his brothers got shafted, others got functional immortality. From an atom, they could be reduced and they'd come back. Guilliman was next in line, and he got a good head on his shoulders. And the childhood.
I mean, really, in the universe of 40K, what else do you need?
You know, at first, it seems very boring. And it is. But if you really want to boil down everything that Guilliman is to two essential things, it is the solid head that sits squarely on his shoulder and a name that is infinitely fun to maul. That's pretty much it. Rumbleboffin got a knack for governance and logistics. He's the guy who ensures that everything runs as it should in the best way possible forever. All of his brothers were off conquering worlds and doing good numbers, right? He was the guy who set up an entire empire. That's still functional today and has the highest standard of living in the entire Imperium, while also stamping out Marines so fast you cannot sneeze without finding one on the cover of a book.
Or the cover of a box.
Or the cover of a video game.
Or in the video game.
Or in the video game.
Or on the branding.
Yeah. Or life-size cutouts. That is how effective he is at logistics. And you may think, yes, obviously, empire building slowed him down. He was not conquering as fast as some of his brothers. No. It didn't. He was still one of the faster ones.
He was taking and keeping.
Yes, despite putting the most time into some of, well, not the most time, that's Lorgar, but putting a considerable amount of time into each and every world that the rowboat conquered. It is impressive, it is commendable, and it is why I love him. He is stability incarnate, and it's all backed by, like I mentioned, a solid childhood raised by humans. It was so good, in fact, that thousands of years later, he still goes back to it, and he still views it as kind of his anchoring point. Despite everything. Despite the ship very much so not being at shore anymore. The Imperium today is a mess. It is bureaucracy, red tape, and fighting everyone everywhere all the time, not losing but not winning at anything ever. The Emperor's dead and currently stuck on a chair that takes up half a mountain to keep him alive, maybe. It's not going well. And that's me being very positive.
I think that's the yes. It's the kindest way to put that.
And it makes perfect sense that you would want Mr. Stability to be the guy in charge of it all. The guy to bring back, to hopefully duct tape it all back together, which is a task that is the source of his infinite sorrow. He is so sad all the time. His first words were, "Why do I yet live?" I don't think they were his first words, but they were
his first words after coming back to life.
He said it.
Rebirth.
He said it that week is what matters. His life sucks. Half his family split up, killed the other half, or left them missing, and they're off doing God knows what, and all his loyalist brothers are off doing God knows what. It's just him to hold it all together alone. He can't even talk to Dad anymore because he's stuck on a throne, and speaking to him is like being stuck in a mental wood chipper. It's thoroughly unpleasant, and so he has to fix it all. And he has to do this while also dealing with the fact that despite his best efforts, the Imperium is hell-bent on cannibalizing itself. He wrote a book that was a guideline of, hey, this is how you win various battles, and this is the best way to organize, and how to make sure we never have a heresy. It is now treated as religious text and has been used to the detriment of some battles. It's been adhered to that strongly. He wants to go to work. Well, guess what? We got to go get your desk from the local museum because it was a venerated artifact. Same thing with your chair. And are you sure you need to use that pen? I mean, You signed the codex with it. Can we just please keep this in the museum?
It's in a display case.
Please
It's sealed. We can't get that out of there.
And on top of all of that, he's stuck in an armor that keeps him alive, but is also 40k armor. Fitting through doorways is difficult, and I love how when they do a really good job of describing how cumbersome this thing is, because he has to full. Oh, what's the name of that Batman? Clooney?
The one who can't turn his neck?
Yes. Clooney. He has the full Clooney body turn to face somebody. Does not hamper him in combat at all, but it's not thrilling to wear in day-to-day life.
I would figure. I mean, he is the guy who's writing treatises. I can only assume writing with that huge gauntlet is not easy.
It's not helpful at all. Oh, and if he leaves it, he's in an incomparable amount of pain. Just the worst. He is the poster boy of stress. That's why you see him in any 40k media, and he just looks it. It's awful, but it's also why I love him. It leads to a bunch of fun character moments while also moving the Imperium in a direction. I don't know if it's better or worse, but it's in a direction.
It's a direction.
Yeah, it could be the end times. It could be the rebirth of the Emperor. Who knows? What matters is he's moving, he's shaking, and yes, taxes suck. Nobody likes them. The IRS, not on anyone's nice list. However, Guilliman is if the IRS took about 80% of your pay, but you never saw a pothole again. Your roads are all paved smoothly, and the trains are running on time no matter what. If it's 15 seconds late, there's a national apology over it, and it will not happen again. And so, you can see why he's beloved. But now, let us get into Orican.
Orican, esoteric knowledge and mental might personified. When he was born, he was to be the next of his family in a very long line, relative to the Necron tier, line of warriors to be inducted into the rank of the Immortals. But Orican was on the weaker end of things. He's not really a fighter archetype. And so he was no use with any form of blade or gun. Instead, Orican took to the arcane, stealing himself away in the cryptech arts, especially his favorite one of them, chronomancy. Orican became one of the greatest of the cryptechs, earning a position right next to the Triarch as their personal astromancer, giving them their personal predictions on whatever was going to happen. With his mastery over chronomancy, Orican was able to see the curse that biotransference would bring to the Necron tier as a whole, and was the only one of them to refuse it. He needed to be dragged through the process by his fellow Necron tier brethren in order to become the Necron he is today. Nowadays, Orican's pretty much the same guy, hyper talented, very, very resolute in his own beliefs, except now the training weights have been taken off. Biotransference may have stripped Orican of flesh and soul, but it also took with it the weaknesses of both. Orican already had a massive understanding of the past and future and anything to do with the cryptarch arts, and biotransference allowed him to grow to even greater heights, letting him not just predict the future and read the past, but walk back into the past to make his future predictions a guarantee. Though he guards this as his greatest secret. Not a lot of people know about it. Personality-wise, I would describe Orican as a bit of a miser, to put it very lightly. He has a massive chip on his shoulder for the whole that little thing, the whole biotransference thing, and he has lost a lot of respect for his fellow Necron. The others of his species just barely tolerate this, and only out of respect and or maybe fear for the great power that they know he has behind him, and will even call on him when they know no other cryptech skills are going to cut whatever they need to get done. On top of that, he's also a massive control freak, out of both a bit of disdain for the toll biotransference took and the long sleep on his fellow Necrons' minds, and an opinion that the drowsy Empire isn't making moves as quickly as it should. Orican will frequently supersede his will over any other Necrons to get the job done. My favorite example of this is shown in the way Orican runs his ship, which is to say he runs it. Almost all of it, as quoted in The Infinite and Divine. Instead of a command throne, he likes to sit floating in a repulsor field surrounded by glowing false hologram celestial charts, spiraling predestination models, and damage reports. A spider lurking in a luminescent web. No one is to speak to him, not the bridge crew, not the captain. All orders come through interstitial command, a thought network of instantaneous feedback that changed through the entire ship's complement. The chain rated out of Orican to the bridge crew to the operational sections, all the way down to the strike fighter pilots. And that's not to say he's just making himself the center of the web for gits and shiggles either, as when a missed shot leads to a failed ambush on a couple orc cruisers during the course of that book, Orican projects his personality onto the gun operator's body, nails the shot the second time around, and then reprojects his personality onto another Necron just to slap the operator and exclaim, "That's how you do it, don't make me come down here again." So that's why Orican holds a special place as one of my favorite characters in all of 40k, with his flippant irreverence to pretty much everyone else in the 41st millennium, regardless of their power relative to his, and his insane dedication to petty feuds with his neat freak on-again, off-again rival Trazen. I firmly believe that Orican is one of the greatest characters that 40k has to offer, and I wholeheartedly recommend that anybody who hasn't yet pick up a copy of The Infinite and Divine.
And that does put an end to this. As always, thank you for tuning in, and thank you for being you.
What's up? My name is GlueBoy. I'm a YouTuber who, obviously, because I'm part of this, mainly covers 40k, though I also cover some other topics like Vampire the Masquerade and other like tabletop games that really tickle my fancy. Mainly, I cover grimdark topics in a way that isn't very grimdark. And speaking of, what's a better topic than a horrifically evil mad scientist? I'm talking about Fabius Bile, a man known by many titles. Primogenitor, the Clone Lord, Chief Apothecary to the Emperor's Children. Fabius Bile is a man of many talents and an even greater arrogance. He is a master of genetics. He can create ridiculously creepy mutants, just crafted in whatever he designs them to be. Fabius Bile is the best guy to go to if you need to get your hands on some new gene seeds, something that is incredibly difficult to get your hands on if you're Chaos, mainly because you don't have access to the good stock. Either it's damaged horribly or warped and mutated, so you can't really use it. The main issue is you have to work with Fabius Bile, a man that is completely self-serving, that he is completely willing and able, and he will do it. He'll turn on you. You might ask Fabius to get you a bunch of new soldiers. He'll do so, but he'll also completely experiment with your soldiers and leave you worse off, in a kind of a Dark Eldar deal, which I do mean that very literally, as he studied abroad in Kamara. He was welcomed there. I think that speaks volumes. This puts Fabius in a really fun position, as all the big top names in the Traitor Marines hate his guts and want him dead. But on the other hand, if Fabius dies, that's a very big stock of gene seed. That's gone. That's a bunch of your troops and future recruits you just can't get. That's what we call in the business job security. He can create clones of basically whoever, himself or the Primarchs. Fabius has done a good amount of Primarch cloning, and there are 3 very famous versions of this. Really quick, he cloned Horus as a funny little goof right after the Horus Heresy, with the Emperor's Children stealing Horus's body. This clone was murdered by Abaddon when he was creating the Black Legion, which now Abaddon wants Fabius Bile murdered. He also made a perfect clone of Fulgrim, like pre-fall Fulgrim, and was raising it like his kid. He doesn't have him anymore because he sold this Fulgrim clone to noted kleptomaniac Trazen the Infinite for a fuck ton of gene seed. Like fresh, brand new gene seed created right at the beginning of the Great Crusade. And then there's the monthly payment of Ferrus Manus clones he sends to Fulgrim, since Fulgrim has it in his head that if he just saves scums enough, he can eventually convince Ferrus Manus to go traitor. It is yet to work. I don't know what about his current appearance has yet to convince Ferrus Manus to turn against his pops, but every time Fulgrim has to again decapitate Ferrus Manus. Also, he clones himself, as Fabius Bile has something known as the Blight. This is a disease, a very warp-based disease, that infected every single one of the Emperor's children right at the beginning of the Great Crusade when they were setting off from Terra. This is a pretty bad deal. Fabius did his best to cure it. He couldn't. He is one of the few survivors of the original Emperor's children, and he still has it. His only method of curing it, kinda, is by cloning himself, and whenever the Blight is gonna kill him, he jumps bodies. The Blight will eat away at his organs, cause massive organ failure, and just kill him. Main issue, the Blight is warp-based, so it does jump bodies because it's kind of attached to his soul. This does lead to some really fun situations for Bile though, since he's a very pragmatic man, and then you build off the fact that with the Blight, his body deteriorates as he expends energy, which means that Fabius has to be a lot more smart when it comes about his engagements, which means in reality, he avoids combat and is instead a sneaky little asshole who gets away with conniving schemes rather than full-on assaults like a normal Space Marine would. He goes through all this effort because Fabius Bile believes he cannot die until his great work is achieved. His great work is basically matching the Emperor and surpassing him in genetic research and sciences, working on the gene seed to create the next step in Astartes, and what he calls his new men, which is Human 2.0. Essentially, he created better humans that are actually noted to like take down Astartes. He specially created them and trained them to be Astartes killers, which is terrifying for the Space Marines that he has around him. And he sprinkles them around Imperial worlds, something that the Inquisitors have a special eye for and do their absolute damnedest to go find and eliminate. They don't want this spreading. Fabius wants to replace all of humanity with his cool new humans. And at least the way he puts it, once his new men propagate the universe, he can die. He can just finally let things take his place. Personally, I believe he's full of shit. I don't believe that Fabius Bile's ego will let there be a universe that does not contain Fabius Bile. He can create augmentations for Space Marines, either their organs or just other parts for them. In fact, he even created the parts that would later become the Noise Marines. That was all him. And he's the only guy outside of the Night Lords to ever pull off a skin trench coat, because that's the important aspect when it comes to being evil. You gotta have that drip. Sure, you might give out Primarch clones like your own special form of currency, but what's the point if you don't look sick while doing it? But Fabius Bile will get his start in the Emperor's Children Legion of the Space Marines. Terran born, he would work his way up, becoming the chief apothecary, and would use the fall of the Emperor's children to his benefit, as he was really interested in genetics and experimentation, and really wanted to work with that dang old gene seed, like so bad, but it was not allowed. Even saying that he wanted to like mess with the gene seed, heresy, pure heresy. So when Fulgrim started getting a little weird and the rest of his legion started getting weirder, he saw his chance. He approached Fulgrim with his ideas. Fulgrim, a little corrupted with his special demon sword, said yes at the prospects where he got to build up the building blocks to what the Emperor's children are today. He had a grand old time with this whole Slaanesh corruption letting him do more research. But funnily enough, this is the part that I really like about Fabius. Fabius Bile still believes in the original methodology of the Emperor and the idea of the Imperial truth. Despite all of the corruption with Slaanesh, he never devoted himself to Slaanesh or any of the Chaos Gods, as arguably Fabius is one of the few atheists in 40k. I don't just mean that he doesn't worship the gods, I mean he truly does not believe they exist. He believes that the warp and the chaos gods are figments of people's imaginations. They are emotions and natural phenomena given shapes, names, and identities because human beings are too weak and they need to believe that higher powers exist so they can feel significant. The funny part is that he's technically right. The warp is kind of built out of thought stuff and the unconscious thoughts and emotions and feelings of, psychically based creatures, which is the thing that builds into Fabius's arrogance, because anytime he proposes these theories, you're like, you're technically not wrong, man, but damn, you're such a dickhead about it. This comes about in some very funny ways, like the times when greater demons will try to communicate with him and he'll hard ignore them or refuse to speak to them by their name. The fact that he believes this so inherently and truthfully that minor demons, when they're around him, are agitated and physically affected by his presence because Fabius Bile, by pure willpower, has manifested a minor form of the pariah effect. obviously warp entities are affected by emotions and thoughts. Him not believing so hard fucks with them. They don't like it. He also hard tanked the direct gaze of Slaanesh themselves and kept affirming gods are for the weak as Slaanesh was staring down at him and stopped one of his hearts. The man has to be right that bad, which is, I think, one of the things that makes him so fascinating. And it's all this that also makes it really hard to call him a Chaos Marine, because like, he's classified as a Chaos Marine in like the game terms. More accurately, he's like a renegade, because in all of this, if we're being very true to lore, if it was up to Fabius himself, he would put himself into his own special category that is just Fabius, because the man is that arrogant. But yeah, that's this little segment. Again, I'm GlueBoy. I cover other 40k topics and other grimdark settings. So if you like this, go check out my channel, subscribe, see if anything else I cover, I guess, interests you. And thanks again to Arthur for letting me be in this big collab video. Thanks again.
Hello everyone, this is Revenn and Handy, and it's time to talk about the only character Imperial Knights have that is very cool in lore and decent on tabletop, and an army that otherwise keeps getting hit with the cyclonic nerf torpedo. So it's time to put those learning glasses on and talk about Canis Rex. But first, let's get this part out of the way for those who know nothing about Imperial Knights or what they are.
You know those giant robots that we used for farming, construction, and defense against all those giant monsters and man-eating plants?
That's kind of a dumb question, but I guess I'll humor you this once.
Now hear me out. What if we took the guns that still work off of our tanks and colony ships, and we stick them on the giant robots?
Let's fucking do it! And that's my terrible explanation of how Imperial Knights came into existence. Now, as a lot of us know, you dig giant robots, I dig giant robots, we dig giant robots, and most importantly, chicks dig giant robots. Did I just use this as an excuse to quote Megas XLR? Yes. Yes, I did. Now, a lot of those that know nothing about Imperial Knights would assume that Canis Rex is this guy right here. Nope. That's Sir Hector Cerberin, the pilot of Canis Rex. In the lore, we are first introduced to Canis Rex and Sir Hector when the Petulant Man-Child Legion, the Iron Warriors, were invading the Night homeworld of Randoran Alpha. The Night House Cerberin, which controlled Randoran Alpha, put up a strong resistance to the Iron Warriors, but alas, one by one, the mighty engines of House Cerberin fell. Sir Hector, like many of his fellow Knight pilots, were taken captive and subjected to the torture of the Iron Warriors. One by one, each of them corrupted alongside their knights, turned into demon engines forever bound in servitude to chaos. But not Sir Hector. As the last remaining noble of the mighty House Cerberin, he had an indomitable spirit and bowls of ceramite, and no amount of torture could break his faith in the Emperor. And his faith was answered. Somehow, Canis Rex pulled a Titanfall and initiated Protocol 3.
Protocol 3. Protect the pilot.
What are you doing?
Trust me.
Activating on its own, slaughtering any Iron Warrior or corrupted knight that got in its way. Canis Rex, leaving a trail of carnage in its wake, eventually reached Sir Hector, breaking him free of his chains and allowing him to escape. But wait, the story doesn't end there. Sir Hector and his merry steed then decided it's time for a rebellion. So he took the Oath of the Freeblade and made it his mission to take revenge upon Chaos and its servants, to rescue as many enslaved serfs of his homeworld as he could. But alas, he eventually accepted that Chaos had taken a hold of his homeworld. So after many battles, he had to abandon his home of Randoran Alpha, but not before earning himself the title of Chainbreaker, for his heroic deeds performed freeing those enslaved by Chaos. Hence the name of the Scalp to High Heaven box, Chainbreaker Lance. But you would think that's where his story ends, but it doesn't. From there, Sir Hector and Canis Rex went on their own excellent adventure across the galaxy, dude. Performing the same deeds he once did on his homeworld in the name of the Emperor. I'm sorry, I can't. And that's a little bit of lore about Canis Rex and why the knight itself is so cool. I mean, come on, who doesn't like giant robots and also a cheeky Titanfall 2 Easter egg? On the tabletop side of things, Canis Rex is a Questoris Preceptor pattern Imperial Knight. That's a mouthful. So it's equipped with a Las Impulsor, a special Thunderstrike Gauntlet called Freedom's Hand, and a multi-laser. Now, on tabletop, he can hit like a truck since he hits on 2s for everything, and he has a strike profile for a Freedom's Hand with a strength of 20, AP -3, and damage 9 with 5 attacks. So you're wounded in pretty much everything besides a Titan on yes. The Las Impulsor is just the Las cannon, but on steroids with 2 profiles for high and low intensity. This is where using Canis Rex in an army gets a bit iffy since the Las Impulsor can be a bit swingy, because high intensity is D6 shots at 24 inches and low intensity is 2d6 at 36 inches. And honestly, the multi-laser is just there for extra shots at this point. But I'm really hoping GW shows Imperial Knights and Chaos Knights some love for 10th edition, since let's just say Imperial Knights are a heavy investment for me. But with how hard they got hit by the Cyclonic Nerf torpedo, I'm not really that optimistic at this point. So yeah, just wanted to say congratulations to Arthur for hitting 40,000 subscribers on YouTube, and thank you for letting me participate in this fun community collaboration. But this has been Revenn/Handy, the burner of wallets and maker of terrible financial decisions, signing off.
What's up, nerd? Didn't expect to see me in a lore video, did you? We've had quite the selection of characters so far, but absolutely not enough Sigmar! Dick! Hey, you can't just go and skip to the next 40k character, come on. Age of Sigmar lore is cool too, I promise. Let me introduce you to the reason why Stormcast are way cooler than Space Marines. We have frickin' dragons! These are the Dragon Brothers Karazai and Krondus. They are 2 of Stormcast's newest models, but are among the oldest characters in Sigmar lore. Their father is Dracothion, who, if you know a bit about Sigmar lore, you might have heard pop up here and there. He's essentially like the cat dad of the mortal realms, floating around space finding random beings like the Seraphon, Sigmar, and the old world itself, and he brings them home. Dracothion is also the father to a whole race of dragons, the Draconith Empire, which included sort of dragons like Drakes and Dracoth too. Krondus was the lord of the Draconith Empire, and Karazai was a bit like a jealous younger prince. During the Age of Myth, the first era of AOS lore, there was relative peace. The 2 brothers were scholars, devoting themselves to magic. They learned of the existence of many other races, including the Seraphon and the powerful Slann. Everything was well. There wasn't exactly much going on in the first few centuries. The gods were just getting to know each other and were forming happy little alliances. But peace was a little bit too boring for a certain greedy cowman. Kragnos, his name, was a demigod of his race, the Drogoth. That's probably the closest we're gonna get. He was like a demigod of the Drogoth, and just like most of the Destruction armies, the only thought in his one brain cell is
Round 1, fight!
The Drogoth waged war against the Draconith Empire, trampling over everything in their way. They are simple creatures that seek nothing but pure destruction and power. And let me tell you, these guys were a formidable threat. Imagine a herd of cows or bison stampeding and how much damage they cause to the land beneath them. Now scale that up like 10 times. The footfalls of the Dragoth's hooves are so catastrophic that even the earth would split underneath them. The Draconith probably just weren't prepared for such a threat in a time of peace, and their forces could not match those of Kragnos. As much as Karazai, Krondus, and literally all of the dragons tried fighting him off, they couldn't win. So, in a last desperate bid for help, Krondus communed with the Slann that he'd learned about before, and brokered a deal to trade some of their last remaining dragon eggs in return for their help. Together, the Seraphon Dragon Alliance had a plan. They led Kragnos atop a mountain, where they had laid a trap. As he scaled the mountain to meet them, they unleashed a vortex of magic, channeled from both lizards and dragons to hold him in place, while the mountain itself opened its gate to imprison Kragnos inside it. In his final moments, Kragnos would not go without a fight, and he struck Karazai with his mace, breaking his horn and leaving him with a giant scar across his majestic draconian face. They finally managed to seal away Kragnos, and they had only lost, well, the entirety of the Draconith race. Oh, and if you're wondering, what happened to Dracothion? Wasn't he, like, literally their father and a god? Why didn't he come and help them? Honestly, he's a bit of an absent father. He was probably out to get the milk while his children were getting genocided. Karazai and Krondus reacted very differently to seeing their race die in front of their eyes. Krondus became a doomer incel and removed himself from everything happening on the plains, ashamed of his failures and the fall of his empire. He would travel alone and observe the other races, knowing how they will all eventually fall as his did. Every other empire's effort to fight for survival seemed futile, meaningless to him after what he'd seen. Karazai, on the other hand, stayed on the plain of Gur where Kragnos' race lived, and vowed a bloody vengeance against the Drogoth. They had killed his kin, and he wouldn't settle for anything less than the extinction of their own in return. But that's all in the past, all in the first era of Age of Sigmar lore. Why did they suddenly get new models now? Well, millennia later, the world-ending Age of Chaos pretty much confirmed Krondus' mentality that every race would eventually die out, almost similar to the end times in the old world. But this time, one still remained. Despite the gods splitting their allegiances and chaos overrunning almost every plane, Sigmar and his plane of Azir still stood. And not only just stood, they lived, thrived even, and most importantly, they fought. With the forging of the Stormcast Eternals, they had a real chance to fight back chaos, and Krondus started to feel hope. Perhaps, if he couldn't bring back his empire, he could help this one. Karazai, on the other hand, still feels regret for his empire's collapse, but he mellows his sorrows with pure, undiluted violence! He's on that genocide grind set, baby! He hasn't stopped fighting the Drogoth since the day Kragnos was in prison. He's been at it for so long that the plane of Gur has physically and mentally changed him. He left behind all of his innate magical prowess as a dragon and even forsakes his draconian ancestry. He has become a brutally efficient killing machine. He has become single-minded and impulsive. He has become just like the enemy he once hated, Kragnos. With his endless slaughter and the arrival of chaos, the Drogoth were actually wiped out, so he had to find something else to tide his temper, killing demons instead, which coincidentally is kind of what Sigmar wants as well. Karazai and Krondus had been apart for millennia, but the ties of fate were slowly bringing them back together. And just to really tie that fate knot, Kragnos just happened to wake up from his enforced nap. And this is the point where finally the Seraphons show up again, and the Slann are like, lol, you know we still have your eggs, right, Lamau? I thought Dracothion was a pretty absent father, but wow, do the genes run strong in the family. With this, the two dragon brothers and Sigmar formed the Pact Draconis that would see the union of dragons and Stormcast on the battlefield to fight off this enemy once again and rebuild their army together. And that's why we get these sick new models, and maybe I'll paint this one up on my channel. Congratulations, you've just learned a little bit about Sigmar lore. See, it wasn't that bad. Don't tell them, Mr. Bone Man, but they actually have very little lore to go off of, so I probably made up some shit in between. Now you can go back to your significantly less cool, non-dragon 40k characters. Enjoy, nerd.
So, Sigismund. What can be said about him? Well, Sigismund is the Space Marine of Space Marines. He quickly became the right hand of his Primarch, Rogel Dorn.
You are such a good boy, Sigismund. I love you, son.
I love you too, Dad.
And he was such a badass that the world leaders named him the Black Knight.
It's not a phase, Dad!
Okay, I still love you, son.
Then the drop site massacre happened. And the adherent Euphrates was like, hey, so you can fight with your gene daddy or die alone like a little bitch.
I ain't no bitch! Daddy, please don't make me go to Isfahan.
Okay.
Also, I'm a space Catholic now.
I don't love you, son.
Then the traders arrived to Terra. And
Rogel gave Sigismund the task of being the Emperor's champion.
Take this, my boy, and go kill every last one of them.
Okay. I love you, Dad.
I don't love you, son.
Then Horus bitch-slapped Sanguinius, and in turn the God Emperor bitch-slapped him. Rogel and Sigismund chased the traitors into the Eye of Sauron. The Blue Man Group threatened another civil war because something Codex Astartes, and Sigismund was made the first High Marshal of the best Space Marine chapter. Fight me. Then he waited 1,000 years at the Eye of Sauron for the traitors to come back. And they did, with Abaddon as their leader. And then Sigismund was like,
Bet you won't 1v1 me, Asadon.
Bet you're a bitch.
I ain't no bitch.
Then Sigismund beat the shit out of Abaddon until Abaddon got a lucky hit in and cut him in half. But Sigismund had one last thing to say.
Fuck you and your dad too.
And that's the tale of the High Marshal.
Ah, Basilio Foe, the character so charmingly twisted that he would make even the most hardened inquisitors second guess their convictions. If you haven't met Foe yet in the Siege of Terror books, let me paint you a moderately spoiler-free picture. Imagine a wizened, unnaturally old man with the brains of Malcador the Sigillite, and skill and creativity beyond that of Fabius Bile. Now, picture Terra during one of its most chaotic periods, the Unification War, a time when warlords, Foe included, were carving out their own little kingdoms on humanity's homeworld with strategy, brutality, or, in Foe's case, twisted genius in biomechanics and bioengineering. While his rivals brandished crude swords, axes, guns, and banners, Foe instead brandished syringes and schematics, weaving together flesh to create abominations that defied nature itself and laid waste to his enemies. Although we were never provided with a detailed description of these beasts, we are talking about creations so mind-bendingly grotesque that even the Emperor, typically a paragon of stoicism, seemed to express clear disgust at Foe's horrific violation of natural law. And so, recognizing the threat that Foe posed to his vision for humanity, the Emperor deployed his legions of Thunder Warriors to end his vile rule. But Foe had other plans. He slithered aboard a ship and punched it into the deep dark void to survive another day. With this, Foe vanished into obscurity. That is until the advent of the Great Crusade brought the Primarch Horus Lupercal and the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet to the long-lost human world of Veliktan. Unbeknownst to the Imperium, this lost human world had become Foe's newfound kingdom and biological playground. Bolstered by decades of peace and experimentation, Foe fiercely resisted Horus's request for compliance, and in the battle that followed, his legions of grotesque creations not only withstood the onslaught led by Horus, but also posed a legitimate threat to the life of the first found Primarch. Here on Veliktan, Foe's mastery over the unnatural almost led to the death of one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. But unfortunately, almost is very much the key word here. Despite his best efforts, Foe found himself captured by Horus's forces and sent back to Terra. Now returned to the world where he once fled, Foe was imprisoned within the Imperial Blackstone prison, far away from his familiar, regenerative tools and facilities, and far away from any hope of new biological innovations. Fast forward a decade or so after his imprisonment, and the winds of fate blew once more for Foe. In the Siege of Terra, Foe was chosen for interrogation by the nascent Order of Interrogation, and in the presence of his interrogators, Foe put forward a unique proposition. In exchange for protection against the coming destruction, he would devise a biophage, a virus with the potency to eradicate not only the Astartes, but also the entire lineage of the Emperor, including the 16 surviving Primarchs. Such a proposal, brimming with implications for the Imperium's destiny, inevitably piqued the interest of those interrogating him. And fueled by hope and desperation, Foe's interrogators released him from the Blackstone under guard to allow him to refine and validate his claim. And as the Siege of Terror reaches climax at the end of The End and the Death Volume 2, Foe was granted access to the state-of-the-art confines of Malcador's laboratory. Now sat in the middle of an array of advanced scientific devices and all the biological matter that he may require, Foe has begun the process of creating the biophage. This experiment is chock full of narrative potential and could forever alter the course of the Warhammer universe. Should Foe be successful in the work he is undertaking within Malcador's lab, a number of questions naturally arise. What are the repercussions of the existence of this bioweapon post-siege? If a sample survived the siege, where might it be held in 40k, and who knows of its existence? Will its incredible potential ever be realized? What happens to the genius that is Basilio Foe?
Ephriel Stern is a powerful sister of battle, and in the current lore is called a the saint. Just the saint. She is a living saint and appears where she is needed as an independent agent of the Imperium. Sister Stern's story was first told in Inferno magazine and has had very few modifications since then. Ephriel Stern is unusual in that she is a psychic. Nope. She has powers like lightning shooting from her eyes, but these are not psychic powers. And on the tabletop, they have never happened in the psychic phase, so they're not psychic powers, and in 10th edition she does not have the psychic keyword. Not a psyker. And if you want to know more about how to use her on the tabletop, I have a video on my channel to help you do that. I'm a Sisters of Battle player and make videos with advice on how to play them. When looking into her lore, I knew that Ephriel Stern got her powers from sisters in a convent, but I thought it was like the power of friendship, and then in 40k fashion it was grim when they all died afterwards. I was not expecting this. And if I had to learn about it, then so do you. So, Sister Ephriel Stern was a pretty normal battle sister. And like Rumpelstiltskin, the Scholar Progenium contacted Stern's parents before Ephriel was born, and as an act of duty to the church, they promised their next daughter to the sisterhood. So not all the sisters in the Scholia Progenium are orphans. But Stern never knew her parents. She was just dropped in the donation dish as it was passed around in the church, and was raised, most would say trained, in the Scholia Progenium and chosen to be part of the militant wing of the ecclesiarchy in the Order of Our Martyred Lady. Ephriel was good at it and quickly became one of the Seraphim elite, and a Seraphim superior on top of that. She loved to fly, and she loved her beloved sisters. I have never heard of the term foreshadowing before. You may have thought that the elite of the Adeptus Sororitas were Celestians, but the Inferno magazines where this story first came out were published in early 3rd edition. Yes, that is how we measure time, by which edition of 40k was out. And at this time, there were no Celestians. Codex Witch Hunters wasn't published, and in the 2nd edition Sister of Battle Codex, the bodyguard for a canoness were just Seraphim without jump packs and carrying bolt guns. Also, Celestians with bolt guns are gone from 10th edition of 40k, but I don't mention this every time I talk about sisters. Just most times. Anyway, Stern went on a mission to investigate why a convent of the Order Pronatus, the sisters that guard relics, had not been answering their phone. On the world of Parnis, the Slanesh greater demon
Astaroth
had tried to make suffering more efficient. He defeated the sisters of the Order Pronatus and stuck them all together in a big ball of living flesh called the Screaming Cage. It's a cage, but it's made of flesh, and it screams. Yeah. You know how you can be so close to someone that they feel like your sister? This is too close. You are inside one another. Your thoughts are her thoughts, you lift your arm and her leg extends instead. Side effects include sharing every sad thought and all physical pain. Unexpected side effects include sharing faith. So Stern and the rest of her mission, all her fellow sisters were killed. But the, box of sisters from the Order Pronatus channeled their faith into Stern and brought her back to life, helping to escape the demons. So sisters from our martyred lady have been resurrecting even before Celestine made it cool. Stern was then under investigation by an Inquisitor Silas Hand, who wanted to know why she could fly, even without her jump pack, and what was up with all the weather patterns coming from her face. But Stern passed all the trials, proving that she is faithful and uncorrupt. But Inquisitors had to be suspicious, even when given the all-clear, so Inquisitor Hand took her back to Parnis, where the Screaming Cage was waiting, and screaming, but they had more faith powers to give to Ephriel Stern, as well as all of their knowledge as an order to help Stern fight chaos. Just not against this particular big greater demon, as Inquisitor Hand sacrificed himself to banish it after everyone else died. Standard Sisters of Battle lore, really. The Cage of Flesh also died. You can't fix things like that in 40k. And Stern was once again the only one to walk away from Parnis. She has since fought in a lot of places, including the Pariah Nexus, which suppresses all psychic powers, but none of Stern's powers, because she is not a Psyker. Did you also forget that the Inquisition, well, one Inquisitor, cleared her of being a Psyker? She is not a Psyker. And then she met an alien called Kaiganil, and they became best friends. Nope, that is the end of the story. Just before that, Ephriel Stern is not a friend of aliens. She is a very good girl. And don't feel scared of a demon turning you into a cage of flesh. It's not like when the killer is now out to get you because they found out that you just watched the film that they are in. Sleep well, my darlings.
Hi, I'm Chris Tester. I'm a voice actor, as you may have guessed, and my favourite Primarch is Lorgar. And probably the main reason or why that is because of Aaron Dembski Bowden's book, The First Heretic, which was actually one of the first 40k novels that I personally read, and it made a huge impression on me, specifically because Lorgar comes across as perhaps one of the most un-Primarchy type of Primarchs ever. He's incredibly fallible. He's very vulnerable in the early stages anyway, before he becomes demonic. And I completely understand his perspective, which is that first and foremost, he wants to look after and care the people rather than dominate and conquer the people. That's his whole first focus. The second being that he didn't get a clear enough steer on how Daddy Emperor kind of feels about worship, which seems to be a bit of a sliding scale anyway. And then subsequently what happens with Monarchia when everything is kind of taken away, his faith is taken away, that level of trust and his whole bond with his father is taken away as a result. And it leaves him in this weird limbo, paradoxical position where everything that he thought he knew disappears.
I waged a holy war in the name of a father who finally descended from above, saw the oceans of blood and tears shed in his name, and simply didn't care. I wasted my youth hunched over scripture and religious codices, planning for the Messiah's coming, believing he would give meaning to all human life, meaning that thousands of human cultures are forever seeking. And I was wrong. He brought as many questions as he did answers. He was hollowed through, infested by secrets. I hate that about him. He is a creature incapable of trust. Perhaps he did bring meaning. But he didn't bring the meaning humanity needs.
Now, I'm not going to excuse a lot of the nasty shit that he does, because he's a Primarch, and lots of Primarchs do nasty shit. That's partly why we like them. But I find it fascinating that even when he is fully bent over to chaos, he is still completely self-aware of that paradox and what he represents as a result. So in terms of going on a real journey from a state of absolute purity and human-centric, wanting to look after people, through to, casual slaughter, but being self-aware about how paradoxical his whole situation is. That, to me, makes him incredibly complex as a character, and therefore a lot more interesting.
I echo my father's actions, and the ironies compound. The contradictions seem irresolvable. I must make war on a religion whose foundations I have laid, and whose followers reverently mouth my words.
He's not just tragic. He has that self-awareness in him, which I think kind of fuels a lot of his choices. And he's pretty articulate about it at the same time, which, as a voice actor, I really like.
Today's topic is...
the most powerful character in 40k.
Ooh.
I think you mean to say, hi.
What? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to Waypan. I'm Cal.
And I'm Sunny. So, are we going to be talking about some kind of space marine, or an Eldar, or a Necron, or is it a demon?
Nope, it's just a normal guy.
Okay, so why is he so powerful?
I want each and every one of you to take a look at what you are watching this on. This black mirror. Statistically, you are looking at a mobile phone. But for the vast majority of you, perhaps even more than 90% of you, perhaps even more than 99% of you, you will have your mobile phone within arm's reach.
This technological wonder is an absolute game changer. It has changed society and culture in ways we still don't fully understand.
But what if you couldn't have a mobile phone? Let's say that mobile phones kind of did a galaxy-wide Skynet on them?
Oh, I know. This is the one where you're talking about the Men of Iron.
Yep, the fall of humanity from its greatest height is actually known as the Cybernetic Revolt.
So that means humanity may have integrated a lot of technology inside them.
Correct. So what happens when you can't use anything like mobile phones because it's considered an abominable intelligence?
You would have to have a really good memory.
A really, really good memory.
They would have to be a savant.
Exactly. Introducing Uber Amos, servant of Inquisitor Gregor Eisenhorn.
Is he the inspiration for that derpy auto savant?
Yeah. I hated painting his million wires. I mean the model. But he doesn't actually look like that. I mean, he's got a cybernetic eye and he does have some cybernetic augmentations.
Right. His brain had been cybernetically augmented with increased mental processing power, data storage, and memory recall abilities. But you told me that wasn't why he was important.
No, and I'm not making this up, but he was affected by a meme virus.
Meme virus?
Yes, making him a data addict.
So what, is he addicted to Doge memes and watches YouTube all day?
Not quite. I mean, he's literally addicted to knowledge. Some people are like that now, but he absorbs everything he can, like a living computer, and this is what makes him the most powerful character in all of 40k. One of the biggest things that people point out when it comes to 40k or 30k is yeah, sure, we know that, but they don't know that. But imagine having the 40k equivalent of a internet search engine, or hell, even a Pokedex.
The symbol of Zinch indicates a Zinch-type follower. They are known for holding up lines at fast food restaurants, changing their orders again and again.
Yuck it up. But having information in the 40k universe is literally hacks. This, and this means a Tyranid invasion. This, that, and the other means a chaos cult. The average Inquisitor would kill you for your 40k book collection. So yeah, having that information on tap, yeah, well...
Okay, I see why you say that. So what's his story?
Well, that would be spoiling it.
So they should just read the Eisenhorn trilogy, Xenos, Malleus, and Hereticus.
Malleus.
Okay.
Most perturbatory.
I guess it's time for us to sign off.
Keep those brushes wet. Bye-bye.
You think they'll get that this is our format, done in short, where we set up the premise, explain why it's important, and then conclude, and then we have a jokey skit at the end?
Of course not. They're Arthur Bones watchers.
But We're Arthur Bones watchers.
Exactly.
I think you said more than you're meant to.
Hello again, and welcome, fellow fans of the Burning Verses. It is I, your dedicated scriber of stories, your informant of the in-between realms, your very own fan with too much time. And today, I have been tasked with coming before you with a character, an example of some aspect made carnate within this wonderful, terrible world of Warhammer 40k that we all love to escape into. I have chosen not to linger beneath the eaves of cathedral spires, or to languish under the tyranny of unfit masters. No, I have chosen chaos. I have chosen to bring before you the identity of a sorcerer, a brother, an assassin, a comrade, a traitor, a giver of mercies, and a breaker of kings.
I am not some tank-bred weapon, grown into a mold to be dumped onto a laboratory floor and then given a gun. I was born just as you were. My life began under the eyes of 9 burning stars on the desert world of Prospero. There, before I was taken, before I was promised justice and strength and a place among the stars by the false Imperium, I was given my name by a family long lost to me. I carry that name still, for it is all I have left of that life. I am Isyander Kaon, and I may have more to teach a prodigy like you than you can possibly imagine.
Isyander's life begins in relative humility upon the sandy world of Prospero. When the Imperium came, he was inducted, due to his potential and fitness, into the Space Marine Legions. And his sister, Itzara Kaon, who had suffered a horrible, brain-destroying attack via a predator of the warp, was transformed and interred into Kaon's ship as the Anamnesis, the sentient machine spirit of Kaon's flagship, and later, the true vengeful spirit within Abaddon's flagship of the same name. From there, his story is relatively unremarkable until the Horus Heresy, and more specifically, the burning of his home world of Prospero. Pinned down by attacking space wolves, injured, very nearly disemboweled, the Chaos Space Marine that would become the Blade of Abaddon and the Herald of the 13th Black Crusade was truly forged that day. Upon the brink of death, Kaon unwound the very existence of his would-be space wolf killer, annihilating the mongrel's physical existence utterly. Abandoned on that dead world, left by the Crimson King known as Magnus, his own Gene Father, he was rescued by none other than Leorvine, a world eater, a son of Khorne. And from there, Kaon's path in chaos was forever set. Kaon befriended daemons, creating bonds of ephemeral friendship with the Neverborn themselves, bonds which were reciprocated most of the time. He was a sorcerer who confided and trusted in a child of Angron, who showed mercy and brotherhood to a prince of Slanesh, who even went so far as to make a Dark Eldar Scourge his bodyguard and best friend. A scholar in truth, amidst a galaxy driven mad by attempts at categorization, Kaon accepted that he was a sorcerer, but never constrained himself to that label. For you see, dear listener, Kaon is a healer and an assassin, as well as a warrior and a mage, mending his crew and negotiating through hostilities almost as often as he maimed his enemies and crushed opposition to his growth and survival. Is it any surprise that, in order to fuse together the warring bands of traitors within the heretical legions of the Eye into a new, more powerful legion, Abaddon needed a man like Kaon at his side from the very start? Every line is defied, every expectation subverted, every definition redefined. And it is not because Kaon is some hectic, mad scrabbler moving from one thing to the next, or some insane contrarian moving simply where he is not expected to go. It is because Kaon is what he wills himself to be, even in spite of the universe, president, and common knowledge be damned. When Abaddon needed a trump card to defeat and breach the perfect city of Slaanesh, he turned to Iskander Kaon for the solution, and Kaon provided. When Abaddon needed to make Magnus kneel to the authority of his legion and its legitimacy, he sent Kaon, and Neil, the Crimson King, did. When Abaddon chose a herald to give themselves to the Imperium and proclaim their impending collapse, he chose none other than the illustrious Kaon to deliver the messages for him. Currently, Kaon lingers, blind and restrained, within an inquisitorial jail. But blind though he is, though he may be denied the warp, stripped of his armor and of his weapons, Kaon laughs still. If there are any who may yet shape the future from unexpected places, then among them must stand Iskander Kaon, the man freed by chaos.
Hey Wargamers, my name is Doug from 2+ Stuff, and a huge thank you to Mr. Bones 40k for letting me jump on here and talk about one of my favorite characters from the Age of Sigmar universe, Neferata, the Mortarch of Blood. Now, if you don't know who this character is, I kind of envy you, because Neferata is a character that's existed both back when Fantasy Battles was a thing, and has now come full circle back to being the old world, and of course in Age of Sigmar since day one. Now, there's a lot to love about Neferata, but let's start here. First off, she is the OG vampire. Nagash had learned how to make himself into a lich, but it was Neferata who went into his black books, got the secrets, created the serum that would then make the Soul Blight vampire curse, as we would later know it, and take it for herself. So not only is she literally the first vampire, but she's also kind of like the mother of the original vampire clans, because she would share it with the nobility of her city, which happened to be Lamia, which, if you're kind of comparing the old world to the real world, is sort of like they're Egyptians. Eventually the Tomb Kings will come from this area, but right now they're just humans and the vampires were just born. In the same way, in the Age of Sigmar universe, Nagash immediately resurrected her because of her cunning, her guile, and her ability to get things done. He wanted to fill the mortal realms with vampires just like they had the old world, and so he tasked Manfred, Neferata, and Usharan, who's gotten a lot of news lately here, with the task of going out and filling the realms with vampires. And what's great about Neferata is we have several full Age of Sigmar novels that show her doing that in exceptional detail. She has the coolest dialogue, the best armies. She leads from afar, she has long-term plots and plans, but she gets in the fight with her daggers and hacks stuff up multiple times in the story. There is not a book that Neferata is in that she does not captivate every single eye, steal every scene, and orchestrate the falling of empires seamlessly. She's also highly known for her use of spies, and for those of you who don't follow Age of Sigmar, this is a 40k channel after all, one of the cool narrative threads that we've gotten recently is in the most recent Flesh Eater Court's book. She's essentially drawing blood from her crazy brother Usharan and sharing that and spreading it around the realms. Now, What people don't know is that if they drink that as if it were wine, they get kind of inducted into his delusion. So in a weird way, she's causing the instability of the mortal realms by poisoning it with the blood of vampires. And she has this entire system set up for keeping Ushran captured, drawing the blood out, distributing it across the different cities. Which is both savage and awesome when you consider Ushran's actually her brother from forever ago. Meaning she is heartless, but she has a plan, she is highly motivated, and every single novel that she's in, as I mentioned before, illustrates that to the T. Lastly here, for those of us who enjoy wargaming on the table, I can tell you personally, she is one of those models that absolutely delivers on her lore, meaning when you put Neferata on the table, she has a massive impact in games. She can control the flow of battle and get in there and just absolutely destroy things herself. It's a fantastic translation from lore to tabletop. Now, on my channel, what I love to do is end all of my videos by talking about why is this cool. So rather than just regurgitating lore facts, I talk about the implications of that within the setting. Neferata is amazing because she is such a powerful, moving force that never feels like a MacGuffin. She doesn't just appear out of nowhere to like save the day or change things like the writer backed themselves into a corner. Her plans and plots are like years in the making. Her books illustrate her through dialogue that is both interesting and very insightful. So she's a character that's like fun to learn about. You know how there's just kind of a static one note? Not Neferata. And proves to us as the OG boss chick that if you want to be a vampire, you go out there and you make yourself a vampire. Now, of course, I have lore videos on my channel, but if you really want to get to know the character, my favorite book that's come out recently is Neferata, The Dominion of Bones by David Annandale. There's just a good mix of tension. She has to deal with Stormcast on one side of her continent, and then a Khorne army on the other, and how she uses spies and misdirection and lies and traps to get all of these forces to fight one another on her ground for her purposes is quite fun. So go check that out. Thank you again so much, Mr. Bones 40K, for having me on.
Man, there's a lot of people talking about 40k here and not the setting that actually matters. So I guess I'm going to be the one that talks about it. Let's talk about Settra the Imperishable, a character who has so many titles that if I decided to recite them, we're going to be here for, well, days, probably. But Settra is very well known, even by fans outside of the Warhammer setting, for a number of reasons. You see, Settra was one of the many kings who ruled over Khemri in ancient Nehekara. What set him apart from everyone else is that Settra had extreme bouts of what could be described as ancient roid rage. Settra wanted to rule, and he wasn't just content with his own city, he wanted to rule the entire world. Obviously, in order to do so, he needed an army, but in order to get said army, he needed to unite his war-torn country, the various different micro-kingdoms that live in ancient Nehekara. And how was he able to do so? Well, with paganism. You see, he beseeched the ancient gods, and for some reason they answered him, probably knowing how angry that he actually is. The gods flooded the Great River, and for the first time in many decades, Khemri started to grow as a nation. This made the local populace and also the priesthood revere Settra as some sort of messenger of the gods, devoting themselves directly to him and throwing their lives away should he so wished. Believe me, he did. With his people firmly under his grasp, Settra decided to unite the warring kingdoms within Nehekara. This naturally meant all-out war, with many pretty much falling as soon as he arrived. These kingdoms were met with two choices. They could either surrender outright and join Settra in his conquest, or they could decide to try and oppose him, but that would generally just lead to those kingdoms and dynasties being destroyed. Even with the resurrection of these ancient warriors long in the future, which we'll talk about a little bit later, only one kingdom actually opposes him, that of Numas. Now, as I said before, Settra was not just content on taking Nehekara. That would have been too little of a scope, especially for a man like him. As soon as the country was united, he sent his forces out to further war, pushing further and further into the known and unknown world. It's unknown how far his reach extended to throughout the world, but some people speculate that there might be ancient cities within the lands of Lustria, maybe even Nagaroth too. What is known, however, is that Settra was pushing further north himself. reaching to the foot of the Black Mountains near the lands that it would eventually be known as the Empire. It was there that he realized that he, like everyone else, is mortal, and eventually he would either be defeated in battle because of his age, or he would just die before uniting the world under his glorious fist. Obviously, a man like Settra would not allow for old age to be the reason for his downfall, and he set in motion a new plan which would forever change not only him, his kingdom, but the rest of the Warhammer Fantasy world. He founded what was known as the Mortuary Cult, a cult of very talented priests, warlocks, and wizards whose only job was to find the secret of immortality so that Settra may live forever. And in truth, the Hierophants of the Mortuary Cult did a fairly good job, able to extend his life and their own lives by many, many decades. Settra was still as youthful as ever. The only problem is that he was still aging. Yes, death was still creeping towards him, at least at a very slow pace. While it would take long, eventually Settra would lay dying full of rage, spite, pride, and just pure ferocity. All hope was not lost, however, as the priests of the Mortuary Cult had promised him a golden age, and that one day he will reawaken to a paradise and a world united under his banner. With that, Settra passed. He was mummified and put into a pyramid. A legion of troops and treasures were also buried with him, some of his most loyal commanders. Now that would have been the end of it, had it not been for a descendant of his long in the future. Now we really don't have much time to explain Nagash, but I'm imagining that a lot of you know who he is, mostly because there's a lot of memes, and for some reason he exists in Age of Sigmar too. But were it not for Nagash, due to essentially small penis syndrome, we would not have seen the rise of undeath in such a disastrous form, where Nehekara, prosperous as it was pretty much decimated, and everyone, or at least most of the people living within those borders, were stripped off their flesh and becoming the Tomb Kings that we know of today. The same very 20, 30-year-old boxers that you're still buying because, yes, I'm not judging you, I've bought myself a bunch of stuff too. Now, due to Nagash's doings and his eventual defeat, we didn't just see the living turn dead, well, undead, but we also saw those long dead rising up once again. Many kings, queens, princes awakening from their tombs and pretty much in confusion, just waging all-out war again. It seems like nothing had really changed. We don't know exactly how long this was going for, but it did seem like it was going to last forever, and it's still not sure if the outside world knew that a legion of undead was clashing with multiple other legions of undead. The fighting would not last forever, however, as Settra himself reawoke. And in his anger, the same anger that he had when he was still mortal, he rallied his legions, his pyramid had stayed dormant throughout all this infighting, and beat down literally every other Tomb King that stood in his way. Nehekara was united once again in its new undead form. Now here, yeah, it's all stayed very much the same. The Tomb Kings haven't moved too much, they've stayed very much dormant. Settra, angry as ever that he hasn't received the golden world that he was promised, and many Lich Priests who did promise him were cut down and ground into dust. From there, not much has been heard from these ancient lands. We do know that some ancient kings have been reawakening, trying to rebel against Settra and being destroyed outright. The Northmen, for some reason, decided to loot this place, and obviously that's never a good idea, especially when an angry king rules over it, leading towards the Battle of Sand and Snow, and obviously Settra has started planning to regain his lost empire, sending forces in raiding parties against Talia, Estalia, Bretonia, Araby, but obviously in the time that he has been asleep, technology has progressed, and yeah, they do know how to fight these warriors now. That is not going to stop him, however, as time is on his side, and he can take as long as he wants to take over the world. Now, we do know of an event known as the End Times, which is essentially Warhammer Fantasy fanfiction, and while I do not like to discuss fanfiction, it is important to discuss one moment of badassery. You see, Settra was practically defeated, trying to hunt down Nagash and get his revenge. The Chaos Gods, being who they are, tried to tempt Settra with unlimited power as long as he served. But as we know full enough, Settra does not serve, Settra rules, essentially telling them to fuck off whilst decapitating a bloodthirster. I told you, Cool character. But yeah, this is a little bit of a Cliff Note version of Warhammer Fantasy's biggest name. And yeah, if you wanted a full video, I mean, that would have been like 4 hours long.
I knew going into this video that no matter what I did, no matter what anyone else's character was on this list, that the outcome of what I was going to do for my contribution was going to be, for one, the last one, and two, I was going to do something a little different. I don't want to come off as an ooh-woo, I'm so quirky, I picked the overlooked character type beat, but it's hard not to when you pick a character like this. Now, I'm not pulling from some obscure book, but I am pulling a character I think I have never seen anyone else talk about. Now, I wanted to talk about a character that is not like the other 40k characters you'd see, especially on this list. Hell, even by Space Marine metrics, he isn't even much of a Space Marine, but he is a hero through it all. So, we are going to be discussing Revenn of the Vergantes. He goes by many different titles, the Captain of the Hex, the First Primaris Spear, but to me he is probably my favorite character in the entire setting of Warhammer 40,000. Though I reserve the right to change that at any point because I read a lot of books and new characters pop up a lot. But regardless, who is Revenn? Well, to understand him, you need to know where he came from. See, he is a member of the Emperor's Spears chapter of Space Marines, who are in a section of the universe that is not easily accessible by normal means. It is called Ilara's Veil, and they are currently engaging in a war on all fronts with a malicious group known as the Exilarchy, a civilization of people puppeted by a malicious group of Chaos Space Marines known as the Pure. Normally, the Spears would have fought alongside the Celestial Lions, but due to orc snipers, they no longer have the ability to fight. And alongside that, they would also have the assistance from another Battle Brother Space Marine chapter that they had before, the Star Scorpions, but they ended up falling to Chaos and inevitably became the Pure. When Rabute Guilliman returned to the Imperium, he tried to give every chapter available Primaris reinforcements, but for those who could not be reached, they were sent the information to make their own Primaris Marines. With the tech limitations that the Spears had, this basically meant there was an entire generation or two of Primaris Marines that died on the table. They knew how to make normal Marines, but during the alpha and beta stages of the Primaris ascension, they ended up finding incredible rejection rates, with the aspirants mutating and dying due to physical complications. The first Marine to not die or be put down due to these complications was Revenn, but he himself was not left untouched by these issues. In fact, he has to deal with these issues every day, as he did suffer mutations because of this. His body is locked up, his arm into a claw clinging to his chest. They did not kill him, though it would have been a mercy. He cannot see the battlefield due to his inherent weakness and power armor not being able to interface with his malformed body. But does this make him less of a man, and does this make him less prideful? No. He's a character that holds on to his pride without a sense of desperation, but with a sense of realism. He understands what his limitations are, but he never lets them destroy him. The first interaction with him in the book, The Spears of the Emperor, is some of the best character writing I've ever seen in the 40k lexicon of novels. There's an off-worlder by the name of Enurata Daz, the helot of the Mentor Legion Marine that was sent to monitor the Spears. She enters a tomb. This tomb was filled with a bunch of dead Emperor spears, very ancient, but the further she delves, the more she finds newer and newer corpses, some of them still having skin and scant amounts of meat on them, until she reaches the result of the first wave of Primaris Marines, deformed and killed before they could even see battle. She weeps a bit to herself before being confronted by Revenn, who just so happened to be there. It's never fully explained why, but my assumption is simply to grieve for the loss of brothers that never had the chance to fight. Their interaction is somber, and he simply asks her what she sees down here, and she says it's a place of great sadness, and he praises her to some degree because he assumed she would say it was a place of deep shame. That exchange says so much, and as you read the book, you find out that he is the captain of one of the main starships for the Spears, the Hex. You find out so much about this character in the story as well as its side pieces. There was the short story called The First Primaris. You find out that he was offered to be put into a dreadnought or given a fully cybernetic body by a few of the Magos from the neighboring Forge Moon of Bologna, but he turned them down every time because no matter what happens, he sees himself as a success. He doesn't need someone else's metrics to determine his goals and why he should do what he does. He simply does it. He is a man, he is a Marine, he is deformed, but he is proud of who and what he is, and I think we can all learn a lot from that kind of thought process. And that was as many Warhammer content creators as I could fit in one video, covering as many characters as they wanted to. I think in general, I'm proud of this fucking long video. I'm also really happy I could pull this many creators together just to make a highlight video. It's crazy how many people said yes instantly. Sure, I got a lot of empty stares from people who had little to no interest whatsoever, but it is interesting the faces that we got. I got to meet some really cool people, and if there is one final message I can leave to you, it is to go check out every single one of their channels, especially the channels on the lower end of the spectrum when it comes to viewership. I think you might find some new favorites. Or at least if you saw one that you didn't know, just give them a look-see, big or small. I promise. From what I've seen, it will be worth it. Who was your favorite of all these that you did recognize? And did I surprise you with a few of the people that were on this list? If so, let me and let them know down in the comments. If I know one thing, it's that there will be people looking. Special thanks to my channel members for supporting me. I enjoy not eating a diet consisting entirely of corpse starch. Thanks again for watching, and till next time.